Let's slow things down. You don't have to listen too closely, just let your mind wander while we talk about something incredibly unimportant. And if you feel like these videos are of any use to you, then you can like and subscribe, but only if you really feel like it. And now, let's begin. In the Wild West, winter wasn't just a season, it was a survival test harsh enough to make a Texas rattlesnake consider hibernation. Forget the romantic image of cowboys riding into the sunset, spurs jingling against the backdrop of a dusty saloon. In reality, many of these hardy souls were shivering their boots off, praying that campfires wouldn't sputter out faster than a dime novel plot twist. Let's talk geography and climate. The western frontier wasn't just a monolithic expanse, but a sprawling stretch of land with climates as diverse as a gold prospector's luck. From the bone-chilling Rockies to the desert expanses of Arizona, the Wild West covered a staggering array of environments. Picture the size of a nation because it was. The Louisiana Purchase alone added approximately 808,000 square miles to the United States. That's enough space to make even the most seasoned explorer feel like a needle in a haystack. In terms of temperature, we're talking extremes that would make a polar bear consider a vacation elsewhere. Average winter temperatures in places like Montana could plummet to a bone-rattling 30-day cephale. Meanwhile, snowfall records in certain parts of the Rockies would make Santa's elves file a complaint. Imagine trudging through 200 inches of snow, which is about as fun as it sounds. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. While the allure of the cowboy life was undeniable, it's worth busting a few myths wide open. The romanticized cowboy image, the Lone Ranger silhouetted against a fiery sky, has more holes than a Swiss cheese. The reality was less about galloping bravely and more about surviving desperately. Sure, they had grit, but glamour? Hardly. Cowboys often spent their nights under the open sky, wrapped in wool blankets that offered about as much warmth as a politician's promise. And those campfires? Let's just say that starting one in a blizzard was the 19th century equivalent of trying to toast a marshmallow with a candle. Many folks imagine the West as a land of endless opportunity and adventure, and it was, but surviving its winters required more than just a taste for whiskey and a trusty revolver. It demanded resilience, ingenuity, and a healthy respect for Mother Nature's icy wrath. In the absence of central heating, pioneers relied on wood-burning stoves, which were as essential as their trusty steeds. But with wood in short supply on the prairies, settlers often had to resort to burning buffalo chips, a resourceful solution, if not exactly a fragrant one. Now, cowboys weren't just playing dress-up in leather chaps and 10-gallon hats for fashion. These were practical choices when facing elements that could freeze a lake faster than you could say, "Yee-haw!" Wool was the fabric of choice, for both its warmth and its ability to insulate even when damp. And if you think layering up was invented by modern outdoor brands, think again. Cowboys layered their clothing like a milfoil, knowing that staying warm was a matter of life or frostbite. Of course, it wasn't just cowboys out there braving the elements. The myriad of people who made up the Wild West included homesteaders, miners, trappers, and Native Americans, each with their own methods of staving off hypothermia. For instance, Native American tribes had mastered the art of winter survival long before European settlers arrived, often using buffalo hides as insulating clothing and covering their tipis with layers of animal skins to keep the warmth in and the cold out. And let's not forget the economic factors that played a critical role in this chilling saga. Gold rushes, for instance, drew thousands of people to areas like California and the Klondike, where winter was less an inconvenience and more a full-scale assault. In the Klondike Gold Rush of 1896-99, stampeders trudged over the Chilkoot Pass, dubbed the meanest 32 miles in the world, often in temperatures that could freeze mercury. They carried loads of supplies weighing up to 2,000 pounds, requiring multiple trips, which was about as fun as it sounds. The harsh conditions didn't stop the determined, but they did thin the herd of less prepared fortune seekers. So next time you think of the Wild West, remember it as more than a backdrop for shootouts and saloon brawls. It was a place where every winter was a trial by ice, where survival wasn't just about bravado, but about smart planning, clever improvisation, and a whole lot of luck. The legends may have worn the hats, but it was sheer tenacity that kept them warm and alive. Speaking of tenacity, let's delve into what really kept those Wild West folks from turning into human popsicles. We're talking about the unsung heroes of the frontier wardrobe, buffalo robes and woolen long johns. Forget the Hollywood image of cowboys shivering in designer leather jackets. These folks were more likely swaddled in buffalo robes, a practical choice if you wanted to avoid becoming a cowboy sickle. Buffalo robes were essentially the Snuggies of the 19th century, except instead of fleece, you had a thick, heavy hide that could weigh a hefty 20 to 30 pounds. But hey, when dealing with sub-zero temperatures, fashion was the last thing on anyone's mind. Now, let's not overlook the quintessential woolen long johns, those all-in-one marvels that made even the most rugged frontiersman look like he was ready for a day of lounging. Made from merino wool or a wool-cotton blend, long johns were the thermal Under Armour of the era. Why wool? Simple. It was warm, durable, and maintained its insulating properties even when wet. Plus, it didn't hurt that sheep were more plentiful than indoor heating systems back then. As for tools, they had more than just a trusty revolver in their arsenal. Enter the humble boot, a frontier staple that was as crucial as food or water. A good pair of boots could mean the difference between trekking through the snow with a spring in your step or hobbling along with frostbitten toes. In 1875, a solid pair of leather boots could set you back about 3 to 5, which sounds reasonable until you remember that the average daily wage was about $1. Think of it like splurging on a pair of designer shoes today, only with higher stakes, like your toes. Now, if you're imagining a cozy winter scene with everyone wrapped in plush wool blankets, think again. A wool blanket in 1875 could cost around $1.50 to $2, a significant chunk of change when you might also be budgeting for essentials like flour and bacon. And don't get me started on the price of buffalo robes, which could range from 6 to 10. Essentially, it came down to a choice, warmth, or a week's worth of food. It's like choosing between your electric bill and groceries during a modern-day cold snap. A decision as pleasant as a porcupine in a pillow fight. Let's not forget the economic pressures that made staying warm a luxury rather than a given. The post-Civil War period saw a massive influx of people heading westward, driven by dreams of land, gold, and glory. But with that came skyrocketing prices for basic goods. The law of supply and demand hit frontier towns like a runaway stagecoach, making essentials as rare as a smile on a poker player's face. Life on the frontier was a delicate balancing act between resourcefulness and sheer grit. It wasn't just about finding the right gear, it was about making the most of what you had. While some could afford the luxury of a buffalo robe, others had to rely on layers of patched-up clothing and the warmth of a community fire. The frontier was a great equalizer, where social status meant squat when the mercury dropped. Survival in the Wild West was a test of human ingenuity, where necessity truly was the mother of invention. The harsh economic realities meant that people had to get creative. For instance, settlers often stuffed their boots with hay or newspapers for extra insulation, a 19th century version of DIY foot warmers. Meanwhile, Native Americans, with centuries of survival skills, used layered animal pelts and ingenious shelters like the igloo-esque snow house to stay warm, proving that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. So, next time you're wrapped up in your cozy blanket binge, watching your favorite cowboy flick, spare a thought for those frontier folks. They didn't just survive the winter, they did it with style, practical, utilitarian style that put survival above sartorial elegance. Their tales of endurance and adaptability are as much a part of the Wild West as any gunfight or gold rush, showing that sometimes the greatest adventure was simply making it through the night with all your fingers intact. Let's dive into the unsung architectural heroes of the Wild West, the humble sod houses and their more upscale cousins, log cabins. These weren't just homes, they were the original eco-friendly shelters, long before sustainable living became a Pinterest board. Imagine a time when building your dream home involved more dirt and less HGTV. For pioneers, these sod houses, or soddies, were the frontier equivalent of a studio apartment, compact, affordable, and with all the charm of a hobbit dwelling. The soddy was a marvel of frontier engineering. Constructed from thick chunks of prairie sod stacked like a giant earthen Jenga tower, these houses were as durable as they were dirt cheap, and boy were they heavy. A single sod brick, about 2 feet long and a foot wide, could weigh up to 50 pounds. Now, picture hauling enough of those to build 4 walls and a roof. Forget CrossFit, this was frontier fitness at its finest. The thick walls provided excellent insulation against winter's icy breath, keeping the temperature inside somewhat bearable. Think of it as the original passive house. Of course, the downside was that these homes came with a permanent, earthy aroma and occasionally spouted grass from the roof. Sod houses weren't just homes, they were organic gardens with a side of existential dread. Log cabins were slightly more upscale, the frontier equivalent of moving from a studio to a one-bedroom. These required access to timber, something the treeless prairies didn't exactly excel at. But where there were trees, there were log cabins, painstakingly built with notched logs stacked Lincoln log style. Each log had to be precisely cut, notched and fitted, a process that could take weeks. But oh, the satisfaction of seeing those walls rise. It was the pioneer version of a victory dance. Log cabins were sturdier than sod houses and, importantly, less likely to sprout weeds. However, the gaps between logs meant that caulking with mud or clay, known as chinking, was a must to keep the wind from howling through like a banshee on a bad day. Now, let's not get too romantic about these rustic abodes. While they had their charm, they were as prone to pests as a sack of flour. Mice, insects, and even snakes considered these homes as much theirs as the human residents did. Imagine settling in for a long winter's night only to find your new bunkmate is a rattlesnake. It was a living arrangement that could make one reconsider the merits of urban living, if urban living had existed out there in the first place. But once you were safely ensconced inside your sod or log palace, the next challenge was keeping warm. Enter the potbelly stove, the unsung hero of frontier warmth. These cast-iron marvels were the closest thing to central heating you could get. The potbelly stove was like the frontier's answer to a Swiss Army knife. It cooked your food, heated your home, and provided a cozy spot for thawing frostbitten extremities. A good stove could set you back around $10, a hefty investment when you might be earning that much in a month. But it was a necessity, not a luxury. The stove's belly could hold wood or coal, whichever was more readily available, and radiated heat that could warm a room, or at least the part of the room within a 5-foot radius. Yet, even the best stove had its limits. In the dead of winter, when temperatures outside could make a polar bear reconsider its life choices, the heat often struggled to penetrate the corners of a drafty cabin. It was a time when a hot meal was anything that didn't come with an icicle garnish. Soup and stew were popular, not just for their warmth, but for their ability to stretch meagre supplies. Imagine a pot simmering on the stove, filling the air with the aroma of boiled potatoes and mystery meat. It was sustenance, not cuisine. A culinary experience that would make even the most adventurous foodie yearn for a simple slice of bread. Of course, not everyone had the luxury of a potbelly stove. For those on the move, or without access to such a marvel, the campfire remained a lifeline. But trying to build a campfire in the biting wind or during a snowstorm was akin to attempting a magic trick without knowing any spells. It was a process fraught with frustration and, often, failure. The fire might flicker to life only to be snuffed out by a gust of wind or a stray snowflake. And let's not forget the added joy of burning buffalo chips when wood was scarce. An aromatic experience that was as delightful as it sounds. So while the Wild West might conjure images of daring outlaws and rugged cowboys, the reality was often much grittier and colder. The battle against winter was as fierce as any showdown at high noon. It was a test of endurance, ingenuity, and sheer stubbornness. For every story of frontier heroism or gold rush glory, there were countless untold tales of those who simply survived another winter by the skin of their teeth. They were the real legends, the ones who faced down blizzards with nothing but a sod house, a potbelly stove, and a prayer. And as we continue to unravel the complexities of life in the Wild West, let's remember that these pioneers weren't just surviving, they were living, and doing so with a resilience that speaks to the very heart of human nature. There's still more to uncover as we move deeper into this historical tapestry, where each thread tells a tale of adventure, struggle, and triumph over the elements. So, stay tuned for the next chapter in this icy saga, where we'll explore even more ingenious methods of survival and the enduring spirit of those who braved the Wild West's harshest winters. As the dust settled from our last chapter, where surviving the Wild West winter was akin to a real-life episode of Survivor, minus the immunity idol, let's dive, nose first, into the warmth of community, the original social network that didn't require a password or Wi-Fi. In the harsh, unyielding landscape of the American frontier, community wasn't just a quaint notion, it was the difference between seeing another spring or becoming a permanent snowdrift fixture. Now, forget the myth of the lone cowboy, the rugged individualist who tamed the West with nothing but his grit and a six-shooter. Sure, it's a great story, but let's face it, even gunslingers had gangs. The reality was far more collaborative. When the thermometer threatened to freeze the mercury, it was all hands on deck, or, more accurately, all hands on sled, because staying alive meant banding together. Think of the frontier community like a potluck dinner where everyone brought their best dish, except instead of casseroles, it was skills and resources. Got firewood? Great, you're the hero of the hour. Know how to fix a broken sled? Congratulations, you've just become the frontier's favorite mechanic. In these tight-knit settlements, everyone had something to offer. And when it came to battling winter, cooperation wasn't just encouraged, it was mandatory. Take the story of the Donner Party. Not exactly the cheeriest example, but a stark reminder of isolation's perils. In 1846, this ill-fated group set out for California, but got stuck in the Sierra Nevada with more snow than a Yeti's backyard. With dwindling supplies of morale, their story serves as a chilling, pun-intended lesson in the importance of preparation and community ties, or the lack thereof. Their desperate situation underlines the brutal psychological toll of isolation, where the cold wasn't just outside but seeped into the bones of their very humanity. On the flip side, there were those who understood that strength lay in numbers. Settlers often formed mutual aid societies, which were the 19th century equivalent of insurance plans, except with more face-to-face interaction and fewer insurance adjusters. These groups pooled resources, labour and knowledge to ensure survival. Whether it was helping to raise a barn or sharing precious firewood, these communities operated on the principle that today's helper might be tomorrow's helped. Primary sources from the era highlight this communal spirit. Letters from pioneer women often spoke of quilting bees. Social gatherings where women would assemble to make quilts, share news and provide emotional support. These weren't just crafty get-togethers, but vital lifelines that wove the social fabric tighter than a well-stitched patchwork. One letter from a Wyoming homesteader, Martha Maxwell, in 1887 mentions, "Without the warmth of my neighbours, the winter would have surely taken not just my crops, but my spirit." And let's not forget the role of the ever-hospitable frontier saloon. Sure, it was a place for a stiff drink, but it was also a communal hearth where stories were exchanged, news was shared, and strategies for survival were plotted over a glass of something that could double as paint thinner. In these establishments, the townsfolk weren't just patrons, they were participants in a shared winter strategy session, albeit one lubricated by whiskey. However, not everyone was lucky enough to have a built-in community. The psychological impact of isolation was as deadly as frostbite. For those who ventured too far from the collective safety net, the winter months could stretch into an endless expanse of solitude, testing mental endurance to its breaking point. It's no surprise that tales of cabin fever abound, stories of settlers who, cut off from human contact, began to unravel like a poorly knit sweater. Consider the tale of Silas Sewell, a Union Army captain who famously refused orders to participate in the Sand Creek Massacre. Afterward, Sewell found himself in Denver, where the harsh winter and his moral isolation took a toll on his psyche. His story reminds us that isolation in the West wasn't just physical, it was emotional and ethical, compounding the challenges faced by those who dared to go it alone. But for every tale of despair, there was one of hope, stories of communities pulling together to keep the wolves, both literal and metaphorical, at bay. In 1878, an early Wyoming blizzard trapped settlers in their homes for weeks. With roads impassable, it was the collective effort of neighbours that ensured survival. They shared food, firewood, and, perhaps most importantly, laughter and companionship, proving that the heart's warmth could stave off even the bitterest cold. Communities also relied on shared knowledge passed down through generations. Oral traditions and practical know-how were as vital as any physical resource. Native American tribes, for instance, had long perfected the art of winter survival, and their techniques were often adopted by settlers who recognized the wisdom in ancient practices. It's a reminder that sometimes, looking back is the best way to move forward. So, as we cozy up with tales from the Wild West, let's not forget the unsung heroes, the communities that banded together, to brave winter's wrath. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving, proving that in the face of adversity, human connection is the most potent weapon. As we prepare to venture into the next chapter, it's clear that the story of the Wild West is as much about community as it is about conquest, showing us that sometimes the real frontier was the one forged in the human heart. And so, as we tip our hats to those frontier communities that braved the cold with a camaraderie as warm as any heated blanket, let's mosey on over to how the legacy of these survival tactics has evolved. Fast forward to today, and you'll find that while we've swapped sod houses for central heating and potbelly stoves for programmable thermostats, some Wild West wisdom still sneaks into our modern lives, proving that even the harshest elements can't freeze out a good idea. First up, let's talk insulation. Back then, it was all about sod, logs, and buffalo hides. Good luck finding those at your local Home Depot. Yet, the basic principle remains the same. Keep the heat in and the cold out. Modern insulation materials like fiberglass and spray foam are the 21st century descendants of those prairie sod bricks. Sure, they don't sprout grass, but they're a testament to the age-old quest for warmth. Just like our pioneer pals, we're still on a mission to keep our homes cozy without having to wrestle a bison for its coat. Speaking of warmth, let's not forget about fashion. The cowboy's ensemble was less about looking dashing and more about not getting frostbite. Enter wool, that time-tested fabric, as versatile as a Swiss Army knife. Today, you'll find it in everything from high-tech outdoor gear to those wool socks your grandma knits. It's the unsung hero of winter wardrobes, proving that some styles never go out of fashion, especially when they keep your toes from turning blue. And then there's the camaraderie. You might not be huddled around a campfire with your neighbors, but the essence of community remains vital. Whether it's a snowstorm that knocks out power, or a global pandemic that makes us all rethink the importance of human connection, the principle of "we're all in this together" is as relevant now as it was on the frontier. The digital age has taken the quilting bee online, with virtual gatherings and social media keeping us connected even when we're physically apart. The tools have changed, but the need for connection hasn't. Proof that the Wild West spirit of community is alive and well, even if it's now hashtagged. But let's not sweep those romantic myths under the rug just yet. The Wild West continues to captivate our imaginations, occasionally glossing over the less glamorous truths. Hollywood has painted it as a playground of rugged individualism, where everyone had a six-shooter and a score to settle. Yet the reality was often more about surviving the next winter than winning the next duel. It's a narrative that's alluring but incomplete, like a saloon that serves the sarsaparilla but forgets the whiskey. The appeal of the cowboy myth endures because it speaks to something quintessentially human, the desire for adventure, independence, and a bit of swagger. But as we cozy up with history, it's worth remembering that behind every legend of the Wild West is a story of survival against the odds, where triumph came not from gunfights, but from grit and gumption. The real heroes weren't just the ones with the quickest draw, but those who managed to keep their families warm and fed through another brutal winter. In truth, the Wild West was a place of paradoxes, a land of opportunity shadowed by hardship, where the promise of a new life clashed with the stark reality of nature's whims. It's this duality that keeps us talking about it, long after the dust has settled. As we look back, we find lessons not just in survival, but in resilience, creativity, and the indomitable human spirit, the real heart of the Wild West. So, next time you're sipping hot cocoa in your thermally insulated home, spare a thought for those who paved the way with little more than determination and a buffalo robe. Their legacy lives on in our enduring fascination with the West, an era as cold as it was bold, as much a myth as a reality. It's a history lesson dressed in leather chaps and woolen long johns, reminding us that sometimes the greatest adventures are not about where you go, but how you manage to stay warm getting there. As the first rays of the Mediterranean sun stretch lazily across the city of Tyre, you roll out of bed, ready to tackle another day in the life of a Phoenician navigator. The air is salty and brimming with the promise of adventure. You can almost hear the bustling energy of the marketplace and the distant cries of seagulls, promising another day of seafaring glory, or at least the occasional bout of seasickness. Now, speaking of glory, let's talk about the real reason. Tyre is the toast of the Mediterranean, trade. You, my friend, are a cog in the machine of a bustling trade economy that makes modern Wall Street look like a lemonade stand. Tyre, your home, is a powerhouse, thanks to its strategic location and its knack for maritime innovation. The city is like the Amazon of ancient times, minus the 2-day shipping, of course. Before you embark on your voyage, you've got some serious prep work to do. Let's start with your trusty vessel. Phoenician ships, often hailed as the Formula One cars of the ancient world, might sound like they were all speed and glamour. Spoiler alert, they were pretty advanced, but don't let the romantic tales fool you. These were no sleek, futuristic watercraft. They were, however, marvels of engineering for their time. Shipbuilding in Tyre isn't just about slapping some wood together and hoping it floats. It's a complex art, requiring cedar wood from the mountains of Lebanon, the creme de la creme of ancient timber. This wood is legendary for its durability and resistance to water, making it the gold standard for shipbuilding. Acquiring cedar isn't just a quick trip to your local ancient Home Depot. It involves a logistical dance of trade agreements, backroom deals, and, let's be honest, a little bit of good old-fashioned bribery. It's like trying to get tickets to a sold-out concert, but instead of a pop star, you're dealing with grumpy merchants and territorial kings. The cost of cedar is no joke either. A single trunk can set you back a pretty penny, if pennies were a thing. Imagine trading sacks of grain, pots of olive oil, or even your neighbour's prized goat to get your hands on this precious wood. But hey, no one said dominating the seas came cheap. Once you've secured your lumber, it's on to construction. Skilled craftsmen. Your shipwrights work tirelessly, chiseling and shaping each plank with a kind of precision that would make a modern carpenter weep with envy. The ship's hull is designed to cut through water with ease, a design that's been honed over generations. These ships are built to withstand rough seas and, more importantly, carry vast quantities of goods. After all, the whole point of your journey is to load up on trade goods and bring them back to Tyre, where they'll be sold at a premium. Now, let's address the myth of the Phoenician ship's speed. Sure, they were fast for their time. We're talking a top speed of about 6 to 9 knots, which in today's terms is akin to a brisk walk. Not exactly breaking the sound barrier, but when your competition is a wooden raft, you look pretty slick. The real edge of Phoenician ships lay in their sturdiness and ability to navigate tricky coastlines, not a turbo engine. As you admire the craftsmanship of the ship, you might pause to reflect on your role in this grand economic machine. Tyre's economy relies heavily on seafaring. It's not just about exploring uncharted waters, it's about survival. The Mediterranean is a highway of opportunity connecting you to Egypt, Cyprus, and beyond. Each voyage is a gamble, and the stakes are high. A successful trip can mean immense wealth, while a misstep could spell disaster. The political climate also plays a role in your daily grind. Tyre is a city-state, fiercely independent yet constantly negotiating its position among rival powers. You might overhear a heated debate in the marketplace about the latest treaty or alliance, each move like a chess game where everyone's trying not to get checkmated by a larger empire. With your ship ready and your crew assembled, you prepare to set sail. The harbour is a symphony of shouts, laughter, and the occasional curse word as goods are loaded and sails are unfurled. You take a moment to breathe in the salty air, knowing that the success of this voyage rests on your shoulders. The sea is calling, and you, brave navigator, are ready to answer. You push off from the dock as the ship begins its dance with the waves, and the city of Tyre slowly fades into the horizon. The Mediterranean stretches before you, a vast and unpredictable expanse that's both your playground and your battleground. As a Phoenician navigator, your toolkit isn't just a sextant and a compass. Those are centuries away from making their debut. Instead, you rely on the stars, the original GPS, and the coastline, nature's own Google Maps, to guide you. Now, let's get one thing straight about ancient navigation. It's not all about gazing romantically at the heavens while whispering sweet nothings to Orion. No, it's more like a constant game of where the heck are we? With the stars as your best bet for an answer. You're trained to read the night sky as expertly as a modern-day city dweller reads a subway map. The North Star, Polaris, is your anchor in the sky, a steadfast guide tucked conveniently above the horizon. But the stars don't just tell you where you are, they whisper secrets of the seasons and the weather if you know how to listen. And then there's the coastline, a jagged line of familiarity that's both friend and foe. Hugging the coast keeps you close to safety, but it also means dodging rocks and shallows, a maritime obstacle course. Landmarks become your road signs. Cape Carmel, Mount Cassius, and the ever-familiar silhouette of Mount Lebanon. Each one tells you where you are in this watery world, a silent witness to your journey. Navigating these waters isn't just about steering clear of rocks, though. It's about reading the political tides as much as the oceanic ones. You see, Tyre's relationship with its powerful neighbors like Egypt and Assyria is as complex as a modern diplomatic summit. One misstep, and you're not just adrift at sea but caught in a political riptide. Egypt is a critical trading partner, a land rich with grain and gold. An alliance with them means access to these treasures, but it's a dance of diplomacy that requires finesse and flattery. Meanwhile, the Assyrians are like the neighborhood bully, powerful, unpredictable, and always watching. Maintaining peace with them is essential for keeping trade routes open and your head attached to your shoulders. This political chessboard shapes every voyage. Your route isn't just determined by winds and currents, but by treaties and alliances. You're not just a navigator, but a diplomat, your very presence on these waters a statement of Tyre's intentions and ambitions. But man cannot live on diplomacy alone. There are practical challenges too, and the Mediterranean isn't as serene as the postcards might suggest. Weather is a capricious mistress, turning from calm to chaos with little warning. Storms can whip up out of nowhere, transforming your ship into a cork bobbing in a tempest. It's a test of your seamanship, your ability to read the sky and feel the wind's subtle shifts. And when all else fails, there's always a touch of superstition. A quick offering to a sea deity, a silent prayer to Baal or Yam, because in the end, a little divine intervention never hurts. Then there's piracy, the ancient world's version of highway robbery. Pirates lurk in hidden coves and shadowy inlets, ready to pounce on an unsuspecting vessel. They're not just after your cargo, they're after your ship, your crew, your freedom. To counter this threat, you've got strategy on your side. You sail in convoys whenever possible, strength in numbers your best defense. And you arm your crew, because a well-placed dagger and a menacing glare can do wonders in discouraging would-be attackers. You also employ a bit of psychological warfare. Phoenician ships are often adorned with eyes painted on the prow, a warning to any potential pirate that you see them coming. It's a mix of practicality and theatre, a reminder that the art of war is as much about perception as it is about reality. As the sun sets and the stars begin their nightly vigil, you take a moment to reflect. The sea is a vast, unpredictable expanse, but it's also a canvas on which history is painted. Each voyage is a brushstroke, a testament to human ingenuity and ambition. You're not just a sailor, you're a pioneer, an architect of Tyre's destiny. And as you stand on the deck, the familiar hum of the crew and the gentle lapping of the waves around you, you realize that this is more than just a job. It's a calling, a legacy. The Mediterranean is your domain, and while others might see it as a barrier, you see it as a bridge, a connection to the world and a testament to the indomitable Phoenician spirit. The journey is just beginning, and the sea holds countless secrets yet to be discovered. You're here to uncover them, one star, one wave, one landmark at a time. And as you sail into the unknown, you can't help but smile, knowing that the adventure is far from over. As you sail into the unknown, the silhouette of a foreign port emerges on the horizon, the promise of trade whispering in the salty breeze. This isn't just any port, mind you. It's a bustling hub, where the ancient world's version of Black Friday is a daily occurrence. The docks are teeming with activity, a symphony of shouting merchants, creaking ropes, and the occasional squawk of a disgruntled seagull. This, my friend, is where the magic happens, or at least where you hope to turn a tidy profit without losing your shirt. Let's talk about those legendary Phoenician trades. First up, the infamous purple dye. Tyrian purple, the original colour of royalty, isn't just some run-of-the-mill pigment. No, this stuff is the ancient equivalent of haute couture, extracted painstakingly from the murex snail. It takes about 10,000 of these little critters to dye just one toga. That's right, 10,000 snails for a single garment. You can see why this dye was worth its weight in gold. The whole process is as glamorous as it sounds, which is not at all. Imagine vats of rotting shellfish and the delightful aroma that comes with it. Yet people pay top dollar or top shekel for it. Talk about suffering for fashion. But purple dye isn't the only star of the show. Glassware is another hot commodity, and Tyre's artisans are the rock stars of this craft. They've mastered the art of glassblowing, turning molten sand into delicate vessels that shimmer like captured sunlight. These pieces are the ancient world's must-have home decor, coveted by everyone from Egyptian pharaohs to Assyrian kings. It's all about that Phoenician craftsmanship, baby, and people are willing to barter their finest goods to get their hands on it. Now, let's debunk a myth while we're here. The Phoenicians have this reputation as peaceful traders, the kumbaya of the ancient marketplace. But let's get real. This isn't some cozy village fair. It's cutthroat capitalism with a side of espionage. You're not just selling goods, you're guarding secrets. The recipe for Tyrian purple is more closely guarded than your grandma's apple pie recipe, and industrial espionage is alive and well. Competitors would love nothing more than to swipe your trade secrets and undercut your business. Peaceful? More like a perpetual game of chess where everyone's cheating. Speaking of cheating, trade isn't just about exchanging goods. It's about strategy. Prices fluctuate wildly based on supply and demand, and you need the haggling skills of a seasoned car salesman to come out on top. Barter is king here. Forget cash. It's all about the goods. You're trading amphorae of olive oil for ingots of silver, bolts of silk for sacks of spices. Every transaction is a calculated risk. How much is that amphora really worth compared to a sack of wheat? It's ancient economics 101, and your livelihood depends on getting it right. And while we're on the topic of livelihoods, let's not forget the economic impact of these trades on Tyre. Every successful deal strengthens the city's economy, bringing in wealth that fuels its growth and political clout. Tyre's not just a city, it's a brand, synonymous with quality and innovation. Each ship that returns loaded with exotic goods is a testament to its maritime prowess and economic might. But it's not all sunshine and shekels. Competition is fierce, and not just from other Phoenician cities like Sidon or Byblos. Greek and Egyptian traders are vying for dominance too, and the waters are rife with tension. Pirates, those pesky sea bandits, are always on the lookout for an easy score. And then there's the ever-present threat of political upheaval. Alliances shift like the tides, and today's trading partner can become tomorrow's adversary. It's a high-stakes game, and you're always one storm or one treaty away from disaster. As you dock at the foreign port, the air is thick with anticipation. This is your chance to make connections, secure deals, and perhaps, if luck is on your side, uncover new opportunities. The marketplace is a vibrant tapestry of cultures and languages, a melting pot where the world converges. You're not just a trader, you're an ambassador of Tyre, representing its interests and expanding its influence. With your goods unloaded and the bartering underway, you take a moment to survey the scene. It's organized chaos, a whirlwind of commerce where fortunes are made and lost in the blink of an eye. You're navigating not just the physical waters but the intricate web of human interaction. And as the day draws to a close, you realize that while the sea may hold its mysteries, the true adventure lies in the connections you forge and the legacy you leave behind. In this world of ancient trade, nothing is ever certain except the relentless ebb and flow of the tides. But as you prepare to set sail once more, your ship laden with the fruits of your labor, you know this. You're not just part of history, you're helping to write it. And the story of the Phoenicians, with all its triumphs and trials, is far from over. The seas await, and with them the next chapter of your daring tale. As the salty breeze fills the sails, urging your vessel back toward the familiar shores of Tyre, you can't help but reflect on what awaits you in the bustling city. Tyre is not just a collection of stone buildings and winding streets. It's an economic juggernaut powered by the relentless engine of trade and a complex web of socio-political intrigue. Think of it as the Wall Street of the ancient world, where every decision ripples through the corridors of power. Now, let's dive into the city's hierarchy. Wealth in Tyre isn't just about stacking up gold and silver like your Scrooge McDuck. It's about influence. The elite class merchant princes, if you will, wields power not through brute force, but through strategic alliances and economic dominance. These are the folks who make the city hum, their wealth derived from the vast trade networks that stretch like a web across the Mediterranean. They're the ones who broker deals, manage fleets, and, when necessary, engage in a little behind-the-scenes skullduggery to keep the competition at bay. In Tyre, your status is as much about your connections as your coin purse. The ruling council, or mishpat, is a mix of hereditary leaders and wealthy merchants. Picture a boardroom where your family name is your ticket in, but your business acumen keeps you there. It's a delicate balance of power, a constant negotiation between tradition and commerce. The wealth flowing into Tyre doesn't just pad bank accounts, it funds the city's defences, its temples, and yes, its political machinations. Speaking of temples, let's address the elephant in the room, Phoenician religion. The ancient sources, particularly our friends the Greeks and Romans, would have you believe that the Phoenicians were constantly sacrificing their children to appease their gods. Talk about a PR nightmare. The truth is far more nuanced and far less sensational. While it's true that human sacrifice did occur, the scale and frequency were likely exaggerated by outsiders with a flair for the dramatic. It's the ancient world's version of tabloid journalism. Local city sacrifices children, film at 11. In reality, religion in Tyre was deeply intertwined with everyday life and economic stability. The Phoenicians worshipped a pantheon of gods, with Baal and Astarte leading the charge. These deities were seen as guardians of the city's prosperity and protectors of its people. Offerings and rituals were as much about maintaining cosmic balance as they were about seeking divine favour. The temples themselves were architectural wonders, funded by the very trade that defined the city. Think of them as the original, multi-purpose community centres, where spiritual guidance met civic duty. But let's not mythologize Tyre's religious practices too much. This wasn't a society of doe-eyed spiritualists floating on clouds of incense. The temples were power hubs, and the priests wielded considerable influence. They weren't just intermediaries between the divine and the mortal. They were key players in the political arena, often acting as advisors or even power brokers. It's a bit like the Vatican during the height of its political power, but with more sacrifices and fewer popes. As your ship glides into the harbour, you're reminded of how all these elements, trade, politics, religion, interlock to form the fabric of Tyrian society. The wealth generated by trade doesn't just fill coffers, it shapes the city's very identity. It funds public works, fortifications, and cultural endeavours, all of which serve to reinforce Tyre's status as a regional powerhouse. It's a city built on commerce, but sustained by a delicate balance of power and belief. Now, back to those Greek and Roman sources. Their accounts of Phoenician culture often read like the ancient version of a horror movie script. Sacrifices, dark rituals, and a people obsessed with wealth at any cost. But like any good story, there's a kernel of truth wrapped in a thick layer of embellishment. The Phoenicians were indeed a wealthy, ambitious people, but they were also pragmatic, using their economic prowess to navigate a world of shifting alliances and constant threats. They weren't just traders and sailors, they were diplomats and strategists, constantly playing the geopolitical chess game of the ancient world. So as you step off the ship, your feet finally touching Tyrian soil once more, you're stepping into a world where every decision, every trade, every ritual is a thread in the intricate tapestry of Tyrian life. It's a city that thrives on its ability to adapt, to innovate, and to leverage its strengths. And as you navigate its bustling streets, you realize that while the myths may exaggerate, they also capture the essence of a people who were as complex as they were influential. The story of Tyre, with all its triumphs and challenges, is far from over. The city and its people continue to shape the ancient world in ways both seen and unseen. And as you prepare for your next venture, you can't help but feel a sense of pride in being part of this grand tapestry, a testament to human ingenuity, resilience, and ambition. As you stroll back through the bustling streets of Tyre, the aroma of spices mingling with the distant clamour of the marketplace, it hits you just how much the city has woven itself into the very fabric of human history. You're not just a cog in an ancient machine, you're part of a legacy that has navigated oceans, brokered peace, and exchanged more secrets than a modern-day spy network. But what exactly is this legacy, and why does it still resonate today? Buckle up, because we're about to take a whirlwind tour of how the Phoenicians left their indelible mark on the world without the help of Instagram influencers or viral videos. First up, let's talk about the Phoenician gift that keeps on giving, the alphabet. Forget hieroglyphs that require a Rosetta Stone to decipher. Phoenician writing was all about efficiency. We're talking about an alphabet with a mere 22 characters, a minimalist's dream, ditching cumbersome pictographs for a sleeker, phonetic approach. This wasn't just a linguistic evolution, it was a revolution. The Phoenician alphabet democratized writing, making it more accessible to the masses and laying the groundwork for the Greek and Latin scripts that would follow. It was like switching from a typewriter to a smartphone, opening up worlds of possibility. In fact, you could argue that this little writing system was the original internet, connecting disparate cultures through trade and communication, far before Zuckerberg was even a twinkle in his ancestor's eye. But let's not just wax lyrical about letters. Phoenician navigation was no less groundbreaking. These ancient mariners didn't just hug coastlines, they braved the open seas, venturing as far as the Iberian Peninsula and beyond. Their knowledge of currents and celestial navigation was like having a secret map that only they could read. And while we're on the subject, let's debunk another myth. The Phoenicians didn't just stumble upon the Atlantic by accident. Their voyages were calculated, driven by an insatiable quest for resources and trade routes. They were the original globetrotters, without the need for frequent flyer miles or overpriced airport lattes. Now, let's pivot to urban planning. Tyre wasn't just a haphazard cluster of buildings, it was a city that showcased Phoenician innovation. With its intricate harbour system and layered fortifications, Tyre was both a fortress and a commercial hub. Imagine a city where every street, every wall, was a testament to both defence and trade. The urban design wasn't just about aesthetics. It was a strategic chessboard that kept Tyrian merchants one step ahead of their competitors and invaders alike. And while modern urban planners might have CAD software and blueprints, the Phoenicians had something else, ingenuity born of necessity. Of course, when you're a civilization that's been around the block a few times, narratives about your prowess tend to take on a life of their own. The Greeks and Romans spun tales of Phoenician cunning and wealth, painting them as both revered and reviled. It's the age-old story of admiration laced with a dash of envy. But peel back the layers of myth, and you find a society as pragmatic as it was pioneering. Yes, they were shrewd traders, but they were also survivors, deftly navigating the geopolitical minefields of their time. In many ways, their story is less about the grandeur and more about grit, how a small collection of city-states could wield such influence through sheer tenacity. So, what can we, in our modern, hyper-connected world, learn from these ancient navigators? For starters, the Phoenicians remind us that innovation often springs from the need to adapt, rather than the desire to dominate. Their ability to meld different cultures through trade, their knack for turning challenges into opportunities, these are lessons that echo through the corridors of time. They teach us that sometimes the most profound legacies aren't built on the backs of empires, but crafted through the art of connection and negotiation. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting a golden glow over Tyre's ancient stones, you can't help but feel that today painted a broader canvas of life in this storied city. From the salty tang of the sea breeze to the vibrant tapestry of the marketplace, each moment adds a brushstroke to the portrait of a civilization that was as complex as it was influential. You've seen the romance and the reality, the myth and the truth, and through it all, the indomitable spirit of the Phoenicians shines through. And so, as you close the chapter on this day, you're left with a sense of wonder at the resilience and ingenuity of those who came before. The story of Tyre and its people is far from a dusty relic of the past. It's a living testament to the power of human endeavour. It's a reminder that no matter the era, no matter the challenges, the quest for knowledge, connection and progress remains an enduring thread in the tapestry of history. As you turn to leave, the city's ancient stones whisper a promise. The adventure is never truly over. In a world where the wisest heads were often adorned with laurel wreaths, Aristotle was more likely to be found ruffling feathers than smoothing them down. Born in 384 BC in the quaint backwater of Stagira on the Chalcidice Peninsula of Greece, young Aristotle was not exactly the poster child for conformity. The son of Nicomachus, a physician to the Macedonian royal court, Aristotle's early life was steeped in the musky aroma of medicinal herbs and the clatter of philosophical debate. If you think about it, Aristotle's upbringing was like being raised in a cross between a medical conference and a philosophy club. Now, it's not as if Aristotle was handed a stethoscope and a toga the moment he was born, but there's no denying that his father's profession left a lasting impression. Nicomachus's work with the Macedonian kings meant little Aristotle was exposed to a world where empirical observation held a kind of magic. Imagine the young Aristotle, wide-eyed and curious, watching his father diagnose ailments with the precision of a man who didn't just talk about the stars but counted them. This early exposure to the practical applications of observation and deduction would later form the backbone of Aristotle's own scientific inquiries. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before Aristotle became the towering intellectual figure known for his expansive works on everything from biology to metaphysics, he was just a precocious kid with a penchant for questioning everything, and I do mean everything. If someone told him the sky was blue, young Aristotle was the type to ask, "But why? And what makes it blue?" This might sound endearing, until you realize he was doing this at a time when most people were content to accept that Zeus simply painted it that way. The death of Nicomachus when Aristotle was just a teen set the stage for a new chapter in his life. He was sent to Athens, the beating heart of ancient Greek civilization and the intellectual equivalent of a brainy kid's Disneyland. Here he enrolled in Plato's academy, which was less Hogwarts and more like an ancient TED Talk with toga-clad sages. The academy was the place to be if you were into big ideas, and Plato was the grandmaster of them all. But Aristotle's relationship with Plato was, let's say, a touch complicated. Picture a high school overachiever who keeps correcting the teacher. Aristotle had this habit of poking at Plato's ideas with a proverbial stick, questioning everything, even the great philosopher's much-loved theory of forms. While Plato might have been advocating for a world of perfect forms, Aristotle was the guy in the back row whispering, "Yeah, but have you actually seen one?" This habit of relentless questioning earned him a reputation for being a bit of a contrarian, which, in an environment where everyone else was nodding along to Plato's every word, made Aristotle stand out like a Socratic sore thumb. It's worth noting that Aristotle's time at the Academy wasn't just about challenging the status quo. It also provided him with an intellectual playground where he could develop his own ideas. He spent a whopping 20 years there. Yes, 20, until Plato's death in 347 BC forced him to look for new pastures. By the end of his tenure, Aristotle was less the eager student and more the seasoned philosopher, ready to carve out his own path. Now, if you're wondering what made Aristotle such an iconoclast, you don't have to look much further than his early fascination with the natural world. His exposure to medicine through his father had instilled in him a love for empirical observation, and he wasn't content with the abstract musings of other philosophers. He wanted to ground his philosophy in the real world, in tangible evidence and logical reasoning. This was a radical departure from the norm, at a time when many philosophers were more interested in metaphysical speculation than in what was happening right under their noses. As for those humorous anecdotes, Aristotle's penchant for questioning everything led to some rather amusing situations. Legend has it that once, during a particularly tedious lecture on the metaphysical nature of reality, a frustrated Plato quipped, "Aristotle, my friend, are you writing a book on contradictions?" To which Aristotle likely replied, "Yes, and your lecture is the first chapter." This kind of dry wit and unyielding curiosity made Aristotle a memorable figure long before he penned a single treatise. So, what did all of this mean for Aristotle's future? His early life set a foundation for a career that would not only challenge the philosophical giants of his time, but also lay the groundwork for modern scientific thought. Aristotle's world was one where the lines between philosophy, science, and medicine were blurred, and he was perfectly poised to straddle all three disciplines. In doing so, he didn't just question the world as it was, he reshaped how we understand it, one probing inquiry at a time. Aristotle's early life had indeed prepared him to challenge not just the philosophical greats of his time, but also to poke his head into the nooks and crannies of knowledge that others tended to ignore. Life at Plato's Academy was like living in a think tank where the rent was paid in ideas. Aristotle, armed with his relentless curiosity, made this intellectual haven his playground for 2 decades. Now, it's not like the Academy was some musty old library where everyone whispered and dusted scrolls all day. Think of it more as an ancient Greek version of a bustling cafe where the chatter was all about the nature of reality and the essence of virtue, rather than the latest gossip or run-of-the-mill chit-chat about the weather. The Academy was a melting pot of ideas, a veritable philosophical United Nations, where scholars from across the Greek world gathered to exchange their thoughts and theories. With so many minds in one place, debates were as common as sandals, and Aristotle thrived in this environment. He quickly developed a reputation for being the guy who would question the unquestionable. If Plato posited an idea, you could bet Aristotle was there with a counter-argument ready to roll. This habit didn't exactly win him any popularity contests, but it did earn him a grudging respect. Plato, the grand old man of the Academy, reportedly had a nickname for Aristotle, the horsefly. Now, this wasn't because Aristotle had a particular fondness for buzzing around people's heads, but because he was a persistent little bugger who would not stop until he'd examined every angle of an argument. Picture a horsefly at a summer picnic, that's Aristotle at any philosophical discussion. He'd circle the table, questioning, challenging, and probing, until everyone else had either conceded the point or thrown up their hands in exasperation. But let's not paint Plato as some grumpy old philosopher unwilling to entertain new ideas. He was a thinker of immense stature, and it's precisely because he valued rigorous debate that he allowed Aristotle to keep buzzing around. This horsefly dynamic between the two wasn't just about disagreement, it was a symbiotic relationship where both men pushed each other to refine their thoughts. Plato's theory of forms posited that the material world was just a shadow of a higher, perfect reality, and while many students nodded along, Aristotle was the one in the back asking, "But where's the evidence?" It wasn't that he dismissed Plato's ideas outright, he simply demanded that they be grounded in observable reality, a novel approach at the time. Now, let's zoom out for a moment and consider the economic and political atmosphere of Athens during Aristotle's tenure at the Academy. We're talking about a city that was the cultural and intellectual hub of the ancient world. Athens wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, buoyed by a powerful navy and a bustling economy. The city had a population of around 300,000, with a democratic system that, while limited by our modern standards, was revolutionary for its time. This political landscape facilitated an environment where ideas could flourish. Debates weren't just academic exercises, they were crucial to the functioning of the polis, influencing policy and governance. The agora, Athens' bustling marketplace, was more than a place to buy figs and olives. It was the heart of social and economic life, a forum where citizens gathered to discuss everything from politics to philosophy. This vibrant milieu shaped the way ideas were exchanged and debated. It's no wonder Aristotle found himself drawn to the empirical, the observable, and the practical. In a city buzzing with activity and ideas, abstract theorizing could only get you so far. For a guy like Aristotle, who thrived on questions and grounded theories, this was the ideal setting. He wasn't just challenging Plato out of some rebellious streak, he was responding to the very air of Athens, thick with discourse and debate. In this city, where the economy and the state were intricately linked, philosophical ideas had real-world implications. When Aristotle questioned the nature of reality or the ethics of governance, he wasn't just engaging in idle speculation, he was contributing to a dialogue that shaped Athenian society. And let's not forget about the practical realities that underpinned this intellectual prosperity. Athens' affluence was bolstered by the silver mines of Laurion and the tributes from its allies in the Delian League. This wealth funded public works, including the very academy where Aristotle honed his ideas. The ancient Greeks might have loved their lofty abstractions, but they were also keenly aware of the economic forces that sustained their way of life. So, while Aristotle's philosophical inquiries might seem esoteric to modern eyes, they were deeply intertwined with the economic and political currents of his time. His insistence on empirical observation wasn't just a personal quirk, it was a response to a world where ideas could literally change the course of history. When he questioned Plato's theory of forms, he wasn't just challenging a philosophical concept, he was advocating for a shift in how knowledge was pursued and applied. To sum it up, Aristotle's time at Plato's Academy wasn't just an academic endeavor, it was a crucible where his ideas were forged in the heat of debate and discussion. In a city that prized both intellectual and economic pursuits, Aristotle's blend of philosophical inquiry and empirical observation was revolutionary. As he moved beyond the academy, this foundation would serve him well, allowing him to challenge the status quo and lay the groundwork for what we now consider the scientific method. As much as he was a product of his time, Aristotle was also a thinker who transcended it, forever altering the landscape of Western philosophy and science. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves, as there's more to explore in Aristotle's journey, including his eventual departure from Athens and the new paths he would forge. Aristotle's departure from the intellectual stew of Athens marked the start of his next big adventure, and trust me, it was a doozy. Imagine Aristotle, fresh out of Plato's academy, packing up his scrolls and sketching a new chapter in his life. But instead of heading for a quiet life of contemplation by the Aegean, he set his sights northward to the Macedonian court. In 343 BC, Aristotle traded the bustling agora for the wilds of Macedon, which was less about symposiums and more about spears and strategy. Now, why Macedon, you ask? Well, the answer lies with a king who was more interested in conquering the world than pondering the mysteries of it. Enter King Philip II of Macedon, a ruler with ambitions as expansive as his territories. Philip, known for his military prowess and political savvy, had a son who needed some serious schooling. This son wasn't just any heir, he was Alexander, the future great, one who'd go on to paint the ancient world red, literally and figuratively. Aristotle's assignment wasn't just about teaching the young prince to read and write. Nope, Philip wanted a tutor who could prepare Alexander for the kind of life where conqueror would be a job description, not just a family tradition. Picture Aristotle, armed with knowledge and a healthy dose of skepticism, stepping into a world where philosophical debates were likely settled with swords rather than syllogisms. But don't assume this was some cushy gig. Teaching Alexander was like trying to train a lion cub with a penchant for world domination. The young prince was known for his fiery temperament and a stubbornness that could make even the most patient philosopher pull his hair out. And yet, Aristotle saw potential, buried beneath layers of royal brattiness, of course. He took to the task like a philosopher to a paradox, seeing in Alexander a mind that could be moulded with the right blend of logic and rhetoric. Imagine the lessons, Aristotle sitting with Alexander under the shade of a Macedonian oak, waxing lyrical about ethics, politics, and the art of war. He probably threw in some biology for good measure, because why not? Aristotle was nothing if not comprehensive, but this wasn't just a one-way street of learning. Alexander, ever the inquisitive mind, peppered Aristotle with questions and challenges, much like a certain young philosopher had done to his own teacher, Plato. The cycle of questioning was alive and well, and perhaps Aristotle saw a bit of himself in the young prince, albeit with more armour and fewer philosophical treatises. There's a legendary anecdote that's too good to pass up. It's said that during one of their many discussions, young Alexander, already dreaming of conquests, asked Aristotle about the limits of the world. Aristotle, with a twinkle in his eye, might have replied, "Why stop at the known world, my boy? The real adventure lies in the unknown." This wasn't just poetic waxing, it was the kind of advice that would echo throughout Alexander's campaigns, pushing him to the edges of the known map. Of course, the mentorship wasn't all lofty ideas and starry-eyed ambitions. Aristotle's teaching style had its quirks. Take, for instance, his penchant for using analogies that, while brilliant, might have gone over a teenage conqueror's head. Imagine Aristotle comparing the complexities of governance to the workings of a beehive, while Alexander nodded along, possibly wondering how bees would fare against a phalanx. The humorous dynamic between the philosopher and his royal pupil didn't end there. Aristotle, ever the observational scientist, reportedly used a menagerie of animals to make his points. Picture Alexander, more at home with war horses, trying to grasp political theory through the antics of a goat. It's said that during one particularly spirited debate about courage, Aristotle pointed to a stray dog chasing its own tail as a metaphor for futile ambition. Alexander, sharp as ever, retorted that at least the dog aimed for something, an exchange that would have been enough to make even the stoic Aristotle crack a smile. But let's not forget the economic and political backdrop to this odd couple story. Macedon wasn't Athens. It lacked Athens's democratic flair, but made up for it with military might and a king who knew how to wield it. Philip II had transformed Macedon from a collection of feuding tribes into a formidable powerhouse. Under his rule, the kingdom's wealth burgeoned, fed by the gold mines of Mount Pangaeus and a series of strategic alliances and conquests. This economic boom wasn't just lining royal coffers, it was funding the kind of military machine that would soon march across Greece and beyond. Aristotle's presence in such a setting was more than just a job. It was an opportunity to influence the direction of an empire in the making. His lessons on governance, ethics, and military strategy weren't just academic exercises. they were shaping the mind of a future ruler whose decisions would reverberate across continents. And while Aristotle might have been a philosopher at heart, he understood the practical realities of power and the importance of preparing a leader who could handle both the sword and the scepter with equal finesse. As for Alexander, his education under Aristotle was a masterclass in balancing ambition with intellect. The young prince absorbed lessons on everything from Homeric epics to the finer points of zoology, all while keeping an eye on his ultimate goal, becoming a ruler worthy of his father's legacy. In many ways, Aristotle provided the intellectual foundation for Alexander's later achievements, instilling in him a curiosity about the world and a respect for knowledge that would serve him well on the battlefield. Of course, not every lesson stuck. Despite Aristotle's best efforts, Alexander's ambition occasionally outpaced his philosophical reflections. But who can blame him? When you're destined to carve out one of the largest empires in history, sometimes pragmatism trumps Plato. Aristotle's teachings, however, lingered in Alexander's mind, influencing his approach to governance and his interactions with the diverse cultures he encountered. In the end, Aristotle's time at the Macedonian court was more than just a chapter in his life. It was a pivotal moment in history. His mentorship of Alexander the Great was a blend of wit, wisdom, and the occasional comedic exchange, laid against a backdrop of ambition and power. As Aristotle watched his former students set out to conquer the world, he might have marvelled at the journey from academic debates in Athens to shaping the mind of a king. But don't close the book just yet. There's still more to unravel in the saga of Aristotle, as his journey through the ancient world is far from over. Continuing on from Macedon, he's got a few more surprises up his toga. So, as Aristotle bade farewell to the martial court of Macedon, he embarked on a journey back to the intellectual heartland of Athens, a city that was as much a character in his story as any philosopher or king. By 335 BC, Aristotle returned to Athens, but this time he wasn't the eager student buzzing around Plato. No, he was now the seasoned scholar, ready to establish his own legacy. And what better way to do that than to open his own school, the Lyceum? Now, the Lyceum wasn't just any establishment. Aristotle's new venture was part school, part think tank, and, perhaps most importantly, a sanctuary for anyone who shared his insatiable curiosity. He was trading the royal court's pomp and circumstance for a place where intellectual discourse was the real currency. And let's not sugarcoat it. Running a school in ancient Athens came with its own set of challenges, akin to juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle. First off, let's talk logistics. The Lyceum wasn't some grand marble edifice funded by the state's coffers. Nope. It was more like an intellectual squat in the corner of Athens, nestled between the city's gymnasiums and public gardens. Aristotle had to hustle to keep the place running. Picture him as an ancient Kickstarter campaign, rallying support from wealthy patrons and collecting donations like a toga-clad telethon host. And speaking of finances, money was as tight as an Athenian sandal strap. Aristotle needed to generate income to keep the scrolls unrolling and the philosophers debating. This was a time when the phrase educational funding was about as real as a Minotaur's summer vacation. So, how did Aristotle manage? Well, he relied on the generosity of patrons who were both interested in and capable of supporting intellectual endeavours. It was a delicate dance, balancing the purity of scholarly pursuits with the practical need for drachmas. But back to the Lyceum itself. What set it apart, you ask? For starters, Aristotle's teaching methods were revolutionary. Forget about the static, sit-and-listen approach. Aristotle was known for his peripatetic style, a fancy word that basically means he liked to walk while he talked. Imagine Socratic seminars on the move, the ancient equivalent of a TED Talk with a side of cardio. Aristotle understood that sometimes the best ideas came not from sitting still, but from letting one's feet wander as freely as the mind. This energetic approach earned the Lyceum its nickname as the Peripatetic School, with students and philosophers literally on their toes. It wasn't just about moving physically. Aristotle encouraged intellectual movement, a dynamic exchange of ideas where questioning was as crucial as the answers themselves. And let's face it, the peripatetic style was probably a godsend for those fidgety students who couldn't sit through another lecture about the metaphysical properties of fire without drifting off. Now, if you're picturing Aristotle as some lone sage, think again. The Lyceum was a bustling hive of activity, and Aristotle was its industrious queen bee. Over the years, he amassed a staggering collection of scrolls, making it one of the first great libraries of the ancient world. Think of it as a precursor to the Library of Alexandria, a treasure trove of knowledge that would both support and challenge the minds of its time. Managing this collection wasn't a walk in the park, though. Scrolls were expensive, fragile, and about as user-friendly as a stone tablet. But Aristotle saw their value, understanding that they were the keys to the past, present, and future of philosophical thought. His library was a testament to his belief in the power of knowledge to transform society, a belief that underpinned everything he did at the Lyceum. Of course, running a school wasn't all philosophical musings and scroll collecting. There were practical challenges too. Ancient Athens was a city where politics and philosophy were entwined like strands of a laurel wreath, and Aristotle had to navigate this complex web. He wasn't just teaching, he was also engaging with the political realities of the day. It was a balancing act of epic proportions, made trickier by the fact that Athens was still nursing the bruises from its losses to Macedon. Despite these challenges, Aristotle's impact was undeniable. His teachings at the Lyceum covered everything from ethics and metaphysics to biology and politics. He wasn't just a philosopher, he was a polymath, and his school reflected this diversity. His approach was as broad as it was deep, a smorgasbord of intellectual delights that catered to every curious mind. Now, let's bust a few myths. Some romanticize the Lyceum as a place where scholars lounged in marble halls, sipping on honeyed wine and debating the finer points of the cosmos. In reality, it was more like an intellectual boot camp. Resources were limited, and scholars had to be resourceful. It wasn't just about lofty ideas, it was about applying those ideas to the gritty realities of life in ancient Greece. And then there was Aristotle himself. Far from the dusty old sage portrayed in Renaissance paintings, he was a dynamic figure, constantly pushing the boundaries of knowledge. His work at the Lyceum was a reflection of his belief that philosophy should be grounded in empirical observation. He was less about contemplating the heavens, and more about examining the dirt beneath his sandals. Quite literally, as he was known for his studies of botany and biology. The Lyceum, with its mix of rigorous scholarship and practical application, was a microcosm of Aristotle's philosophy. It was a place where ideas were not just discussed, but dissected, where the pursuit of knowledge was as much about the journey as the destination. Aristotle wasn't content to rest on his laurels. He was driven by an unyielding curiosity, a desire to understand the world in all its complexity. In the end, Aristotle's return to Athens and the founding of the Lyceum marked a new chapter, not just for him, but for the entire intellectual landscape of ancient Greece. It was a testament to the power of ideas to shape civilizations, a reminder that even in a world of political upheaval and economic uncertainty, knowledge was a beacon of hope and progress. But hold that thought, because the story of Aristotle and his Lyceum isn't quite done yet. There's more to explore, more scrolls to unfurl, and more philosophical paths to tread. Stay tuned as we continue to delve into the life and legacy of this remarkable thinker, a man who dared to question everything in his quest to understand the world. Aristotle's Lyceum was flourishing, a beacon for the intellectually curious and a playground for minds eager to dissect the universe. But, as with all good things, the sands of time were slipping through the hourglass, and the political winds in Athens were shifting. By 322 BC, Aristotle found himself on the wrong side of those changes, a victim of the city's growing mistrust of Macedonian influence. Imagine being the intellectual heavyweight of your generation, and suddenly finding the rug pulled from under you by the very city that once welcomed you with open arms. The political climate in Athens was as volatile as a symposium after too much wine. The death of Alexander the Great in 3023 BC had left a power vacuum, and the city was teetering on the edge of revolt, eager to shake off the Macedonian yoke. Aristotle, despite his philosophical prowess, found himself in the crosshairs of nationalist fervour. The charge against him? Impiety, a favourite accusation of the Athenians when they were feeling particularly grumpy with their intellectuals. It was the same trumped-up charge that had sealed Socrates' fate decades earlier, and Aristotle had no intention of becoming Athens' latest intellectual martyr. So, what's a philosopher to do when the political tide turns against him? Aristotle, ever the pragmatist, decided to beat a strategic retreat to Chalcis, a quiet town on the island of Euboea. It was less an exile and more of a self-imposed sabbatical. Think of it as Aristotle's version of hitting the reset button, a chance to escape the drama of Athens and find some peace. Chalcis wasn't the bustling metropolis he was used to, but it was a place where he could continue his work without the spectre of Athenian politics looming over him. In Chalcis, Aristotle spent his final year not in despair, but in quiet contemplation, surrounded by family and a few close disciples. The man who had spent his life dissecting the cosmos was now reflecting on his own place within it. It wasn't long before illness struck, and in 322 BC, Aristotle passed away at the age of 62. As far as we know, he left this world with less fanfare than he deserved, but perhaps that's fitting for a man who valued substance over spectacle. Now, let's talk legacy, because, in the grand scheme of things, that's what really matters. Aristotle's contributions to philosophy and science are nothing short of monumental. We're talking about a guy who wrote on topics as varied as ethics, politics, metaphysics, logic, biology, and even drama. His writings fill dozens of scrolls, and while only a fraction has survived, what remains is a testament to the breadth and depth of his intellect. Take his work in logic, for example. Aristotle was the granddaddy of deductive reasoning, crafting a system of logic that dominated Western thought for over 2 millennia. He didn't just dip his toes in the waters of logical thought, he built a whole swimming pool and invited everyone else to dive in. His Organon laid the groundwork for formal logic, and it was as revolutionary in its time as the invention of the wheel. Then there's his Nicomachean Ethics, a text that still sparks debate among scholars and students alike. Aristotle's exploration of virtue and the good life wasn't just academic navel-gazing, he was proposing a practical guide to living well, advocating for a life of balance and moderation. His concept of the golden mean, the idea that virtue lies between extremes, is as relevant today as it was in ancient Greece. It's the philosophical equivalent of not overindulging in either Netflix or kale smoothies. Aristotle's work in biology was equally groundbreaking. He was the first to classify living organisms into groups, a precursor to modern taxonomy. His observations on animal behavior and anatomy were ahead of their time, and while some of his theories have been debunked, spontaneous generation, his insistence on empirical observation laid the groundwork for the scientific method. But let's not romanticize the guy. Aristotle was a product of his time, and some of his views are, well, less than progressive. His writings on women and slavery reflect the societal norms of ancient Greece, and they're about as appealing today as a stale piece of bread. Yet, even when grappling with his more problematic ideas, we can't ignore the impact of his broader contributions. Now, let's bust some myths. One of the most persistent tales is that of Aristotle as the solitary genius, working alone in a dusty corner of the Lyceum. In reality, he was more of an intellectual ringmaster, surrounded by students and collaborators. His work was often a collaborative effort, a testament to the power of collective inquiry. So, while it's tempting to picture him as a lone sage pondering the mysteries of the universe, the truth is far more vibrant and communal. Another myth worth debunking is the notion that Aristotle's ideas were universally accepted in his time. The reality is that he was as divisive as a philosopher can be. His insistence on empirical evidence ruffled more than a few feathers, especially among those who preferred abstract theorizing to getting their hands dirty with data. Yet, it was precisely this commitment to observation and evidence that set him apart and ensured his lasting influence. Aristotle's legacy is a complex tapestry, woven from threads of genius, controversy, and enduring relevance. His life was a blend of the romantic and the practical, a testament to the power of curiosity and the pursuit of knowledge. He wasn't just a thinker, he was a doer, a man who believed that philosophy should be lived, not just studied. As we wrap up this journey through Aristotle's life, it's worth reflecting on what made him such an enduring figure in the annals of history. He was a man who dared to ask questions that others shied away from, a philosopher who wasn't content with the status quo. In a world where the lines between myth and reality often blur, Aristotle's commitment to reason and evidence remains a beacon of clarity. So, as you drift off to sleep, dreaming of ancient philosophers and their lofty debates, remember this: Aristotle was more than just a man of his time. He was a thinker for all time, a testament to the power of an inquisitive mind to change the world. And while we might not all be philosophers, we can all learn from his example, keep questioning, keep exploring, and never stop seeking the truth. After all, as Aristotle himself might have said, the journey of understanding is a path worth walking. In the dusty corridors of time, somewhere around 1792 BCE, a young upstart named Hammurabi was making waves in the bustling city of Babylon. At that point, Babylon was more like a promising startup than the mighty empire it would become. Picture a city-state, a little scrappy but with ambition gleaming in its eyes, ready to shake up the competitive world of ancient Mesopotamia. Hammurabi, with his keen sense of strategy and an eyebrow raised at the chaos of his neighbours, was just the man for the job. Now, Mesopotamia wasn't exactly a walk in the park. It was more like a chaotic market where everyone was shouting about their wares and occasionally trying to swipe each other's goods. City-states were in constant competition, and alliances were about as stable as a table with one leg shorter than the others. Yet Hammurabi, with the cunning of a chess grandmaster, knew how to play the game. He wasn't content with just surviving, he wanted to thrive. Hammurabi's rise to power was fueled by a mix of strategic alliances and a little bit of old-fashioned conquest. He was the kind of leader who understood that a good handshake could be just as powerful as a well-placed spear. By marrying off family members and crafting alliances like a master weaver, he extended his influence far beyond Babylon's modest borders. And when diplomacy didn't quite cut it, he wasn't shy about dusting off the old war chariot to make his point. The political landscape at the time was a bit like a soap opera, with city-states such as Isin, Larsa, and Eshnunna all vying for the spotlight. Hammurabi, however, had a knack for turning these tangled plots to his advantage. He formed a rather convenient alliance with the city of Mari and its king, Zimri-Lim. Together, they managed to keep the Elamites, a rather pesky group from the east, at bay. It was a bit like forming a neighbourhood watch, but with more chariots and fewer porch lights. But let's not forget the delightful absurdities of ancient bureaucracy. Mesopotamian rulers, including our friend Hammurabi, had to deal with an endless stream of complaints, disputes, and downright bizarre requests from their subjects. Imagine a king, as a slightly stressed-out manager, trying to keep his team from squabbling over whose turn it is to clean the coffee machine. Tablets from the era reveal a litany of issues: stolen donkeys, disputed fields, and accusations of witchcraft. Hammurabi, ever the pragmatist, had to sort through these with the patience of a saint and the decisiveness of a CEO. Speaking of bureaucracy, Hammurabi was about to make a name for himself with something that would outlive even his ambitious expansion plans: the Code of Hammurabi. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, that's a tale for another day. For now, suffice it to say that Hammurabi's legal acumen was sharpening alongside his military prowess. While Hammurabi was busy expanding his territory, he also had to keep a wary eye on his neighbours. It was a bit like playing a high-stakes game of Risk, where each city-state had its own plans for domination. He knew that a fortress is only as strong as its weakest wall, so he fortified his borders and kept a small army of spies to ensure he was always one step ahead. This vigilance paid off, allowing him to slowly but surely expand his influence. What made Hammurabi truly stand out was his vision. He saw Babylon not just as a city-state, but as a potential centre of a vast empire. His strategic mind was always ticking, always planning for the next move. And that, my friends, is how he managed to turn Babylon from a budding metropolis into the heart of one of history's most famous empires. As Hammurabi strengthened his grip on power, he embodied the dual nature of a ruler in ancient times, part warrior, part diplomat. His ability to wield both the sword and the pen set him apart from many of his contemporaries. He was a man who understood that sometimes you had to fight for peace and sometimes you had to negotiate for war. It was this balance that allowed him to navigate the turbulent waters of Mesopotamian politics with a steady hand. While many rulers of his time were content to raid and plunder, Hammurabi had his sights set on something more enduring. He wanted Babylon to be a beacon of civilization, a place where laws reigned supreme and chaos was kept in check. His efforts to create a stable and prosperous society were driven by a desire to leave a lasting legacy, and in doing so he laid the groundwork for a civilization that would influence the world for millennia to come. As we draw the curtain on this part of Hammurabi's story, we see a leader who was more than just a conqueror. He was a visionary who understood that true power lay not in fear, but in respect. By forging alliances and expanding his domain, he set the stage for Babylon's golden age. And while the story of his legal reforms is yet to come, the seeds of his future achievements were already being sown in the rich soil of his ambition and foresight. With Babylon's foundation laid and ambitions soaring, Hammurabi turned his attention to a new challenge, crafting the laws that would cement his legacy. Enter the Code of Hammurabi, a legal tome etched into stone that would make any modern lawyer's heart skip a beat. This wasn't just a laundry list of do's and don'ts. Oh no, it was a 282-part epic saga of justice, retribution, and, let's be honest, a smattering of ancient absurdity. Get this, Hammurabi's code was one of the earliest and most comprehensive legal documents in history. We're talking about laws covering everything from trade disputes to family matters, and even the occasional incident involving unruly livestock. The Babylonians weren't just winging it when it came to governance. They were laying down the law, quite literally, with Hammurabi's meticulous hand guiding the chisel. Now, you've probably heard of the famous eye for an eye principle. It's the soundbite that's outlived Hammurabi himself, often quoted as the epitome of ancient justice. But let's peel back the layers, shall we? This principle, known as lex talionis, was more about balance and proportionality than mindless vengeance. It was Hammurabi's way of keeping the peace in a society where a small squabble could easily escalate into a full-blown vendetta. Think of it as an early attempt at restorative justice, minus the group therapy sessions. But here's where it gets interesting. The code wasn't just about harsh penalties. It was a social contract that aimed to protect the vulnerable and regulate society. In a world where the strong routinely trampled the weak, Hammurabi's laws provided a measure of security. For instance, Law number 195 decreed that if a son struck his father, his hands would be cut off. Severe? Definitely. Effective? Well, it certainly discouraged backtalk. Let's not kid ourselves, though. Justice in ancient Babylon came with a hefty price tag. Implementing these laws required resources, and Babylon wasn't exactly rolling in gold coins. The cost of maintaining a legal system, from scribes to law enforcers, was substantial. Yet, for Hammurabi, the investment was worth it. By establishing a clear set of rules, he was essentially buying peace and stability in a turbulent world. What's a few shekels here and there compared to a lifetime of political headaches? And then there were the laws that make you scratch your head and chuckle. Take Law 57, for instance. If a shepherd was negligent and let his sheep graze in someone else's field, he had to pay restitution from his own flock. Imagine being the judge in that courtroom drama, deciding the fate of a wayward goat. Or consider Law 261, which dictated that a builder whose shoddy work caused a house to collapse and kill the owner would be put to death. Talk about holding contractors accountable. These laws reflect a society striving for order amidst chaos. They reveal a civilization grappling with the same issues we face today: fairness, responsibility, and the occasional need to wrangle miscreant livestock. Hammurabi understood that a legal code was more than just a list of penalties. It was a blueprint for civilization itself. Of course, even with laws etched in stone, Hammurabi had to deal with the human element. People are unpredictable after all. There were merchants trying to cut corners, farmers disputing land boundaries, and, dare I say, the odd accusation of witchcraft. He was the referee in a game that never stopped, where the rules were clear, but human nature was anything but. As for the costs involved, enforcing the code meant training judges and scribes, and perhaps even the odd bribe to keep things moving smoothly, a practice as old as time itself. Hammurabi's legal system was as much a product of its time as it was a precursor to modern justice. It was a balancing act between the ideal and the practical, between the letter of the law and the spirit of the people. In the end, the Code of Hammurabi was more than just a legal document. It was a testament to the complexities of human society. It showed that even in ancient times, people were striving for justice, albeit in their own unique ways. Hammurabi might not have solved all of Babylon's problems, but he laid the groundwork for a more structured society. If nothing else, he proved that when it comes to governing unruly subjects and goats, a little bit of stone-carved wisdom can go a long way. As Hammurabi's Babylon continued to grow, so did the influence of his laws. The code became a cornerstone of Mesopotamian culture, shaping not just the city-state, but the very idea of justice in the ancient world. Yet, As we shall see, Hammurabi's legacy was not just about laws and governance. There was more to this story, a tale of power, ambition, and the eternal struggle to bring order to chaos. But that, dear friends, is a tale for another day. As Hammurabi's Babylon continued to grow, so did the challenges of maintaining a thriving economy in an ancient city-state. You see, it wasn't all about laws and conquest. There was a whole world of economic reform that needed the steady hand of a ruler who could juggle more than just swords and treaties. Enter Hammurabi, the economic reformer who was about to turn the chaos of Mesopotamian trade into a well-oiled machine, or at least try to. Now, let's get one thing straight. Babylon wasn't exactly the Wall Street of the ancient world. It was more like a bustling bazaar where everything, from barley to bronze, was up for grabs. And with that kind of market, you needed some serious regulation to prevent things from spiraling into chaos. So, Hammurabi did what any savvy ruler would do. He standardized weights and measures. Think of it as introducing the metric system, but with a lot more clay tablets and a bit less decimal precision. The idea was as simple as it was revolutionary. By ensuring that a pound of wheat in Babylon weighed the same as a pound of wheat in Lhasa, Hammurabi made sure that merchants couldn't pull a fast one on unsuspecting buyers. It was a move that not only smoothed out trade, but also helped Babylon become a central hub of commerce. And let's be honest, it probably saved a few ancient traders from being on the wrong end of a buyer's wrath. But standardization wasn't just about fairness, it was also about efficiency and control. In a world where the nearest city could be a week's journey away, having a consistent system meant that trade could flourish. The implications for Babylon were enormous. With a unified system, trade routes became more predictable, and economic prosperity followed. Hammurabi might not have invented money, but he sure knew how to make it flow. However, running an economy was no small feat. Hammurabi faced challenges that would make any modern economist break out in a cold sweat. For starters, there was the ever-present spectre of price gouging. Without a firm hand to keep prices in check, merchants might have been tempted to charge a small fortune for, say, a bushel of barley during a drought. So, Hammurabi, in his infinite wisdom, set maximum prices on essential goods. It was a bold move, akin to slapping a no-scalping sticker on the Babylonian economy. Yet, here's the kicker. Enforcing these price controls was about as easy as herding cats, or Mesopotamian sheep for that matter. Merchants were a crafty bunch, always finding loopholes and ways to bend the rules. Hammurabi's scribes probably lost more than a few nights' sleep trying to keep track of the market shenanigans. But the intent was clear: create a stable economy that wouldn't crumble at the first sign of trouble. Speaking of trouble, let's talk inflation. You might think that inflation is a modern problem, but even back in Hammurabi's day, prices could balloon faster than you can say copper shortage. The primary culprits were often the weather and warfare, two things that Hammurabi, despite his best efforts, couldn't control. A poor harvest could send grain prices skyward, while a pesky skirmish could disrupt trade routes and cause shortages. It's the kind of economic headache that would have any ruler reaching for their strongest drink, perhaps a nice barley brew. And then there were the supply chain hiccups. Imagine trying to run a trade network when your goods are being transported by donkey caravan over miles of dusty roads. Delays were inevitable, and sometimes a shipment would go missing altogether, swallowed by the sands or intercepted by bandits. Hammurabi's merchants must have had the patience of saints or the cunning of foxes to keep the goods flowing. But Hammurabi wasn't just about fixing prices and ensuring smooth trade. He was also deeply invested in the infrastructure that made all this possible. Roads, canals, and storehouses became the arteries of Babylon's economy, and Hammurabi made sure they were in good repair. After all, a flooded canal or a washed-out road could be the difference between a profitable trade season and a complete disaster. Yet, let's not romanticize this too much. These economic reforms were as much about control as they were about prosperity. By regulating trade and enforcing standards, Hammurabi was consolidating his power. He understood that a strong economy not only enriched Babylon, but also reinforced his rule. It was a bit like playing a game of chess, with each economic reform as a move to corner his opponents, or at least keep them off balance. So, while Hammurabi's name might be etched in stone as the lawgiver, it's his economic savvy that truly cemented Babylon's place in history. His reforms laid the groundwork for a system that would influence trade long after his reign ended. But like all good things, this was just one piece of the puzzle. Hammurabi's legacy was as complex as the society he governed, and there were still challenges to face and triumphs to achieve. As Hammurabi navigated the intricacies of ancient economics, he was laying the foundation for a civilization that would leave a lasting mark on the world. Yet, even as he balanced the scales of trade, he had his eyes set on something even greater. But for now, we'll leave our ancient economist at his desk, surrounded by tablets and scribes, plotting his next move in the grand game of history. And trust me, there's plenty more to come in this saga of ambition, power, and the timeless dance of order and chaos. Now, as Hammurabi was busy sketching out his master plan for a thriving Babylon, let's not imagine his subjects were living in some utopian paradise. The truth? Life under Hammurabi could be as harsh as a Mesopotamian summer day. While he's hailed as the grand architect of justice, his reign wasn't all rainbows and fair trade agreements. It was a mix of calculated governance, public relations wizardry, and the kind of hard-edged justice that made eye for an eye more than just a catchy phrase. Let's take a stroll through the PR department of ancient Babylon, where Hammurabi's image was polished brighter than a ceremonial chariot. The famous stelae inscribed with his laws were more than legal texts. They were ancient billboards proclaiming his role as a just ruler. The top of these stone slabs depicted Hammurabi receiving the laws from the sun god Shamash, the ultimate cosmic endorsement. But here's the kicker. While the sun god might have been smiling down on him, some of his subjects were likely squinting skeptically. Because real talk, those laws weren't exactly the egalitarian dream. Sure, Hammurabi promised protection and order, but the code was distinctly tiered. The concept of equal justice for all was as foreign to Babylon as a smartphone. Penalties varied based on social status, with commoners and slaves often getting the short end of the stick. For instance, if a nobleman put out another noble's eye, he'd lose his own. But if the victim was a commoner, the compensation was financial, a slap on the wrist compared to the literal slap of losing an eye. And let's not forget the economic undercurrent. Hammurabi's legal system was also a tool for maintaining the social hierarchy. His reign saw the rise of powerful merchant classes and landowners, and the laws conveniently favoured those who had a bit of clay tablet clout. Disputes over land, debts, and trade were decided in ways that reinforced the status quo. It was a society where knowing the right people, or perhaps greasing the right palms, could tip the scales of justice. But why, you might ask, did Hammurabi need such a strict grip on his populace? The answer lies in the very nature of Mesopotamian life. This was a world of constant flux where droughts, floods, and rival city-states could turn prosperity into pandemonium overnight. Hammurabi's laws were as much about survival as they were about justice. By establishing clear rules, he aimed to curb chaos and ensure that Babylon could weather the storms, both literal and political. However, when we peel back the layers of Hammurabi's legacy, we find a ruler who was as much a product of his time as he was a shaper of it. He understood the power of narrative, crafting an image of a wise and benevolent king, even as he wielded authority with an iron hand. It's a tale as old as civilization itself, the dance between image and reality, between the stories we tell and the truths we live. And speaking of stories, Hammurabi's laws have often been romanticized as the dawn of justice. But let's not forget the dark humour lurking in those stone tablets. Take, for instance, Law 29, which decrees that if a married woman is caught in adultery, both she and her lover are to be bound and thrown into the river. In a world without lifeguards, this was less about justice and more about making an example. It's a stark reminder that ancient justice could be as unforgiving as the desert sun. Quoting from the code itself, "If a man destroys the eye of another man, they shall destroy his eye." Sounds fair, right? Until you realize that this law, and many like it, were as much about deterring crime as they were about delivering justice. The harsh penalties served as a warning to would-be miscreants: cross the line, and you'll pay dearly. It was the ancient equivalent of a no trespassing sign, with a hint of menace. Yet Hammurabi's reign was not just defined by his laws. His legacy was also shaped by his ability to maintain order in a land teetering on the edge of chaos. He fortified Babylon, literally and figuratively, against the uncertainties of the ancient world. And while his methods could be severe, they were undeniably effective. Babylon flourished under his rule, a testament to his strategic genius and unyielding will. But let's not sugarcoat it, the man had a knack for turning necessity into propaganda. His reign was as much about maintaining power as it was about maintaining peace. The Code of Hammurabi was a masterstroke of political theatre, projecting authority while reinforcing the status quo. It's no wonder that Hammurabi's legacy is both celebrated and critiqued, a testament to the complexity of human governance. As we ponder the myth versus reality of Hammurabi's reign, we see a ruler who was as shrewd as he was ambitious. He crafted a legacy that has endured for millennia, a testament to the power of law and the art of rulership, but his story is far from over. There's more to explore in the saga of Babylon's rise, as this ancient city continued to navigate the delicate balance between order and chaos. So, as we leave Hammurabi for now, let's acknowledge the duality of his legacy, a beacon of justice to some, a symbol of harsh authority to others. It's a reminder that history is never one-dimensional, and that the stories we inherit are as complex as the people who lived them. Hammurabi's tale is a testament to the enduring struggle for order in a world that often defies it, a struggle that resonates through the ages. And trust me, there's still more to unravel in the fascinating tapestry of ancient Babylon. As the dust of Hammurabi's reign settled over the ancient city of Babylon, one thing was clear: the lawgiver's legacy was carved deeper into the bedrock of civilization than those towering ziggurats. His code, with its 282 laws, wasn't just a legal document, it was the blueprint for governance that echoed through time like a well-struck gong. Let's not kid ourselves, though. Hammurabi's laws weren't exactly the Magna Carta of ancient Mesopotamia, but they sure set the stage for what's been called the world's first Justice League. So how did a bunch of stone tablets manage to outlast their creator by thousands of years? Well, for starters, Hammurabi's code was more than a set of rules, it was a cultural milestone. It established a precedent for the written legal systems we cling to today, like a lifebuoy in a sea of chaos. It was like the original terms and conditions, only without the tiny font and the ease of clicking, I agree. Future civilizations, from the Assyrians to the Persians, took a page, quite literally, from Hammurabi's book. They adapted and expanded upon his laws, proving that even in the ancient world plagiarism was the sincerest form of flattery. But let's pump the brakes on the romanticism. The code wasn't exactly a beacon of egalitarianism. It was more like a legal pyramid scheme where nobles sat comfortably at the top, with commoners and slaves bearing the weight below. Yet, it was this very system that inspired future lawgivers to think critically about equity and justice, even if only to tweak the rules to their liking. Take the Romans, for instance. Their 12 tables, which emerged around 450 BCE, shared a philosophical lineage with Hammurabi's code, emphasizing the importance of written law as a tool for social order. They saw value in the concept of public, consistent legal standards, even if they, too, had their own version of "let's make it fairer for us." Now, fast forward a few millennia, and you'll find Hammurabi's influence lurking in the unlikeliest of places. Ever heard of the United States Constitution? That august document, though a product of Enlightenment thinking, shares Hammurabi's foundational principle, the law as a cornerstone of society. Sure, the framers aimed for a bit more inclusivity, but the idea of a codified legal system designed to outlast its authors? That's straight up Babylonian, my friends. But even the most enduring legacies come with their fair share of irony. Hammurabi's code was meant to bring order to Babylon, yet it also highlighted the eternal struggle between law and human nature. You see, the unintended consequence of any legal system is the cat-and-mouse game it inspires. Create a law, and someone will find a loophole. This dance is as old as the code itself, where scribes likely spent sleepless nights trying to close the gaps faster than a Mesopotamian merchant could exploit them. And then there's the myth of Hammurabi as the benevolent despot. History has a funny way of polishing the rough edges of rulers until they shine like heroes. The truth? Hammurabi was as much a tyrant as he was a visionary. His laws were a tool of control, designed to keep the social order as rigid as those stone tablets. Yet, it's this duality that makes his story so compelling. He was a ruler who understood that power wasn't just about the sword, it was about shaping the narrative and bending it to his will. So, What can modern societies glean from this ancient ruler in his dusty domain? For starters, the importance of adaptability. Hammurabi's code evolved with time, setting a precedent for legal systems to be living documents rather than static edicts. We too must remember that laws are meant to serve society, not the other way around. And perhaps the most poignant lesson of all? The human desire for justice and the frustration of its often imperfect execution is an ancient and enduring struggle. As we wrap up this tale of laws and legacies, let's take a moment to appreciate the relentless march of history. Hammurabi, with his chiseled code, reminds us that even the most well-intentioned reforms come with a side of chaos. It's a nod to the timeless nature of legal reforms and their knack for creating as many problems as they solve. So next time you're slogging through a legal document or cursing a convoluted statute, spare a thought for Hammurabi. After all, he started this whole rule of law business, and we've been trying to perfect it ever since. In the end, Hammurabi's legacy isn't just about laws etched in stone. It's about the enduring quest for order in a world that often defies it, a testament to human ingenuity and the eternal hope that someday we'll get it right. Until then, we can only chisel away at the chaos with our own modern codes, hoping to leave our mark on the ever-turning wheel of history. In the grand tapestry of Rome's illustrious past, the Roman Forum was the knotty epicenter, where power, religion, and commerce tangled together like an ancient urban spaghetti junction. But before you imagine marble columns gleaming in the sun and senators in togas bustling about like they just stepped off a movie set, let me pull the curtain back on the less-than-glamorous origin story of this iconic place. Spoiler alert, it was a swamp. Yes, before it became the heartbeat of an empire, the Roman Forum was a soggy bit of land that would have made even a rubber boot blush. We're talking about 7th century BCE, back when the area was affectionately known as the Velabrum, the kind of marshy terrain that was perfect if you were a mosquito, but not so much if you were trying to build the nerve centre of a burgeoning city. The local Latin tribes, the proto-Romans if you will, must have had quite the vision, or maybe just a fondness for soggy feet, because they started draining this swampy mess using a network of open drains and rudimentary sewers. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's first big sewer system, was the ancient equivalent of hiring a celebrity architect to design your city's infrastructure. Built around 600 BCE, it was both a stroke of genius and the kind of public works project that would have had ancient taxpayers grumbling. The transformation from bog to bustling bazaar wasn't exactly quick. No grand ribbon-cutting ceremony here. It was more like watching paint dry, if the paint was mud and the drying took centuries. The Forum gradually emerged as a central meeting point, but not because someone laid out a city plan on papyrus and everyone followed it to the letter. Oh no, this was organic growth at its finest, or worst, depending on how much you like chaos. Traders set up shop, politicians gathered to shout over each other, and temples were constructed, all in a seemingly haphazard fashion. It was less like a planned metropolis and more like a student trying to clean their dorm room by shoving everything under the bed. Let's talk infrastructure for a second. If you think your city has potholes, ancient Rome had them beat by a couple of millennia. Early Roman roads were more like dirt paths, and the Forum itself was a mishmash of cobblestones, gravel, and whatever else they could scrounge up. Yet, despite, or perhaps because of its humble beginnings, the Forum became the throbbing hub of Roman life. Like a kind of ancient Twitter, it was where news spread, deals were brokered, and gossip was dispensed faster than a toga at a toga party. Speaking of parties, the Forum was also the site of many a political and religious festival. Picture this, the place packed with Romans from all walks of life, from senators to slaves, all partaking in public games and ceremonies. It was the original reality TV, and everyone had a front row seat. These events were as much about politics as they were about piety. In Rome, the line between the sacred and the secular was about as clear as mud, which, as we've established, was plentiful. Now, let's touch on a popular misconception. The idea that the Forum was always this grand, orchestrated space as something straight out of Hollywood. Sure, by the time Julius Caesar came along, it had acquired a bit more polish, but for centuries it was a mix of grandeur and grit. Early temples were modest, public spaces were cobbled together, and the whole area was a testament to the Romans' ability to make do and mend. The Roman Forum was a bit like an old patchwork quilt full of history. Not always pretty, but undeniably fascinating. So, why does this matter? Well, the Forum's evolution from marshland to metropolis is a testament to Rome's resilience and ingenuity. It wasn't just a place, it was the living, breathing embodiment of the Roman spirit. As Rome grew more powerful, so did the Forum. It mirrored the city's political transformations, from the days of the kings through the Republic and into the mighty Roman Empire. Each stone, each column, each corner of the Forum whispered stories of ambition, power, and the occasional scandal. To sum it up, the Roman Forum's origins are a reminder that even the greatest empires rise from humble beginnings. They don't just spring up fully formed, they emerge through effort, innovation, and no small amount of trial and error. Next time you find yourself cursing modern urban sprawl, just remember, even the Romans had to deal with dodgy drainage and random construction projects. And if they could build an empire from a swamp, perhaps there's hope for our cities yet. Now that's a thought to sleep on. Now, as we meander through the ancient cobblestones of the Roman Forum, let's pull back the curtain on its role as the beating heart of Roman political life. Picture Capitol Hill, but swap out the pantsuits for togas, and you've got yourself a pretty vivid image of the Forum's daily hustle. This place was the ultimate power hub, where senators rubbed elbows with plebeians, and the air was perpetually thick with ambition and the occasional whiff of scandal. It wasn't just a spot for grandiose speeches and lawmaking, it was the stage for a daily drama of political machinations that would put a soap opera to shame. First up on the cast list, the senators. These guys were the creme de la creme of Roman society, the political rock stars of their day. But before you start imagining them as noble, toga-clad visionaries, let's remember they were human, with ambitions, grudges, and sometimes questionable ethics. The Roman Senate was the ultimate old boys' club, a collection of about 300 to 600 men, yes, strictly no women allowed, who wielded power like a conductor, leads an orchestra. Except the symphony sometimes sounded more like a cacophony of personal vendettas and backroom deals. And let's not forget that being a senator wasn't just a ticket to power, it was also a hefty financial commitment. These guys were expected to fund public games and buildings, a sort of ancient Kickstarter with a lot more at stake than a failed board game. Key players like Cicero, the orator extraordinaire, strutted their stuff here. His speeches were as much about persuasion as they were about performance art. Imagine a TED Talk, but with more rhetoric and fewer slides. Cicero's eloquence was legendary. He could probably convince a cat to take a bath. But he wasn't just a smooth talker, he was a sharp political operator who knew how to navigate the treacherous waters of Roman politics. His speeches weren't just about swaying the Senate, they were about shaping public opinion, a reminder that in politics, perception is often as important as policy. Then there was the infamous Julius Caesar, whose very name still sends shivers down spines. The man was a political powerhouse, a general with a knack for turning victories on the battlefield into public adoration. He wasn't content with merely playing the game, he wanted to rewrite the rules. When he crossed the Rubicon in 49 BCE, it was less about geographical boundary lines and more about crossing the point of no return in Roman politics. His assassination on the Ides of March 44 BCE was the kind of dramatic finale that would have made Shakespeare proud. And all this unfolded in and around the Forum, the backdrop to his meteoric rise and brutal fall. But let's not get too carried away by the glamour of high politics. The Forum wasn't just a playground for the elite, it was the stomping ground for the average Roman too. Imagine the plebeians, the everyday citizens, gathering here to catch the latest gossip or witness the spectacle of public trials. These were the original social media influencers, spreading news and rumours faster than you could say veni, vidi, vici. One of the most infamous scandals to rock the Forum was the Bona Dea affair in 62 BCE. This was supposed to be an exclusive, ladies-only religious ceremony, but the notorious patrician Publius Clodius Pulcher crashed dressed as a woman. This wasn't just a social faux pas, it was a political bombshell. The ensuing trial became the talk of the town, showcasing the intersection of politics, scandal, and religion in Roman life. Clodius, by the way, got off the hook proof that even in ancient times, a powerful network could help you sidestep consequences. And let's not forget the economic undercurrents that shaped these social dynamics. The Forum was a marketplace in every sense, where money, goods, and influence flowed like the Tiber River. Roman elections were notoriously expensive affairs, with candidates expected to finance elaborate games and feasts to curry favor with voters. It was a system that favored the wealthy, a reminder that money and politics have been dancing partners for millennia. The cost of running for office could run into the millions of sesterces, and failure often meant financial ruin. A sobering thought for any aspiring politician. The social hierarchies in the Forum were as rigid as they were intricate. Senators at the top, equestrians just below, and then the plebeians and slaves forming the base of this societal pyramid. But in this strict hierarchy there was mobility, albeit limited. Freed slaves, known as liberty, could rise in status, and a few even amassed considerable wealth and influence. It wasn't exactly a meritocracy, but it wasn't entirely static either. The Forum was a microcosm of Roman society, a place where the lines between classes were both observed and occasionally blurred. In the grand political theatre of the Roman Forum, every citizen played a part, from the senators crafting laws to the plebeians who gathered to watch the spectacle. It was a place where ambition met opportunity, and where the best-laid plans could unravel with a single speech or scandal. In this bustling arena, the interplay of politics, economy, and society was as complex as it was dynamic. And while the Romans may not have had Wi-Fi, they certainly knew how to network. As we delve further into the machinations of Roman political life, remember, the Forum was more than just a collection of stones. It was the living, breathing heart of an empire in motion. While the Roman Forum might have been the beating heart of political life, it was its economic pulse that truly kept the city alive and kicking, or perhaps more accurately, haggling and hustling. Forget the romanticized Hollywood image of Rome as a world of endless marble and opulence. The Forum was less Gucci runway and more bustling bazaar. A place where the ancient Romans engaged in the daily grind of buying, selling, trading, and, of course, the occasional swindle. Let's start by tearing down the myth of the Forum as a place of pure grandeur. Sure, by the time of the late Republic, it boasted some stunning architecture, but at its core, the Forum was a working marketplace. Picture it as a giant open-air mall, minus the air conditioning and food court, but with a lot more character and characters. The ancient Roman consumer was no different from today's bargain hunter. They wanted value for their sestertius, and they knew how to haggle for it. Speaking of sestertii, let's talk money. The Roman currency was a bit like the British pound, constantly evolving, but always a little confusing for the uninitiated. The silver denarius was the workhorse of the Roman economy, worth about 4 sestertii. This might not sound like much, but consider that a loaf of bread could set you back around half a sestertius, while a decent toga, the Armani suit of the ancient world, could cost upwards of 100 denarii. That's right, fashion was an investment, even back then. So, before you scoff at your own clothing budget, remember, the Romans were also willing to pay through the nose for a bit of sartorial elegance. The Forum was the epicenter of such transactions, a cacophony of merchants hawking everything from grains to garum, that's fermented fish sauce, for the uninitiated, a staple of Roman cuisine. Trade was the lifeblood of Rome, and the Forum was its thumping artery. Goods poured in from across the empire, Egyptian grain, Spanish olive oil, and yes, even exotic animals for the Colosseum spectacles. Picture a bustling stock exchange, but with fewer suits and more tunics. Now, you might wonder how they managed to keep track of all these transactions. Enter the Argentarii, the Roman equivalent of modern-day bankers. These guys were the financial wizards of their time, scribbling transactions on wax tablets and managing accounts with a finesse that would make any Wall Street broker proud. Their stalls lined the Forum, always ready to lend a few sestertii at interest rates that might make a payday lender blush. But let's not get too carried away with the romanticism of trade and finance. The reality was gritty. The Roman Forum, while certainly a place of economic opportunity, also had its share of economic disparity. The wealth gap between the patricians and the plebeians was wider than the Tiber at flood stage. While the elite indulged in imported luxuries, the average Roman citizen was more concerned with putting bread on the table, or rather, in the basket, since bread was the staple of their diet. And let's talk about the markets themselves. Imagine the smell of fresh produce mingling with the less-than-fresh aroma of livestock. The air was thick with the sounds of merchants shouting their wares, the clinking of coins, and the occasional dispute over a questionable fish. Hygiene, as you can imagine, was not exactly up to modern standards. The Forum might have been Rome's commercial hub, but it was also a place where you watched your step, literally. Yet, it was this very chaos and cacophony that fueled the Roman economy. The Forum was where you could witness the full spectrum of Roman life, from the elite bargaining for luxury items to the commoners haggling for their daily needs. It was a marketplace of both goods and ideas, a place where social classes rubbed shoulders, sometimes quite literally, in the crowded streets. And speaking of social dynamics, the Forum was also a place where the lines between commerce and politics often blurred. Roman elections, as mentioned earlier, were expensive affairs, and the Forum was where candidates often spent their hard-earned or sometimes borrowed sestertia to win votes. Public games, lavish feasts, and even outright bribery were all part of the political playbook. It was a reminder that in Rome, as in many societies, money could buy influence, if not outright power. But here's a twist. While the Forum was a place of economic enterprise, it was also a space of economic regulation. Roman law was keen on ensuring fair trade practices. The edicts of the praetors, Roman magistrates, were often posted for all to see, a public display of accountability that modern regulators might envy. These laws covered everything from weights and measures to the infamous Lex Julia de Annona, which regulated the grain supply to prevent famine and unrest. So next time you're navigating a busy marketplace or scrolling through an online shopping site, spare a thought for the ancient Romans who did much the same thing, albeit with fewer digital distractions. Their Forum was far more than a relic of the past. It was a living, breathing testament to the hustle and bustle of economic life, with all its triumphs and tribulations. And while the stories of emperors and senators often take center stage, it's the everyday transactions and interactions in the Forum that tell the real story of Rome's enduring legacy. As we continue our journey through the Roman Forum, remember that beneath the marble and myth lies a very human history of trade, toil, and tenacity. The Forum was not just a place of opulence, but a stage where the drama of daily life played out in all its gritty reality. And despite the passage of time, the echoes of those ancient markets still resonate with us today, proving that while the players may change, the game of commerce is as eternal as Rome itself. And so, we march from the marketplace of the Roman Forum into its pulsating cultural heart, ready to be dazzled, or perhaps appalled, by the grandeur of Roman entertainment. Think of this as stepping from a bustling farmer's market into the opening night of a blockbuster movie, but with a plot that's bloodier and effects that are all too real. The Forum was a stage not just for politics and trade, but for a cultural jamboree that put the extra in extravaganza. Let's start with the Ludi, the public games that made Hollywood's biggest spectacles look like a neighborhood talent show. These games were held to honor the gods, or at least that's what the PR department would have you believe. The truth? They were as much about political gain as they were about piety. The games were funded by ambitious politicians, eager to win the hearts and votes of the citizens. Imagine candidates today throwing massive parties instead of airing attack ads. Same goal, different method. The Ludi Romani, or Roman Games, were the creme de la creme of these events, held in September in honor of Jupiter, the king of the gods. They featured everything from chariot races to theatrical performances. Think of Ben-Hur minus the camera crew. The stakes were as high as the adrenaline. The Circus Maximus, Rome's most famous chariot racing stadium, could seat around 150,000 spectators. To put that in perspective, that's more than twice the capacity of the largest NFL stadium today. And while modern sports fans worry about overpriced snacks, Roman spectators might have had to dodge the odd runaway chariot. Safety regulations weren't exactly a top priority. Public games were also a chance for emperors to flex their generosity or their ego. Take Trajan's games, for instance, held in 107 CE after his victory over the Dacians. The festivities lasted 123 days, featuring 10,000 gladiators and the slaughter of over 11,000 animals. Peter would have had a field day. But for Romans, it was the ultimate demonstration of power and splendor. You didn't just watch, you experienced the glory of Rome firsthand. But the Forum's cultural life wasn't all blood and spectacle. Religious ceremonies played a pivotal role in the social fabric, blurring the lines between the sacred and the secular like a well-stirred cocktail. Festivals like Saturnalia, which celebrated the god Saturn, were an excuse for revelry and reversal of social norms. Picture a week-long office party where the interns ran the show. For a few days each December, social hierarchies were turned on their heads, and the city was a playground of feasting and fun. And let's not forget the Vestal Virgins, those priestesses of Vesta, who were the ultimate custodians of Roman civic religion. Their presence was so vital that the survival of Rome was believed to literally rest on the eternal flame they tended. Talk about job pressure. These women lived under strict rules, but they also enjoyed privileges that few other women in Rome could boast. They had a place of honour at public games, could own property, and even pardon prisoners. In a society that kept women in the wings, the Vestal Virgins were front and centre. However, the Roman Forum wasn't just a monolithic showcase of Roman culture. It was a melting pot, a cultural crossroads where the empire's vast diversity was on full display. With territories stretching from Britannia to Egypt, Rome was anything but homogeneous. The Forum buzzed with a cacophony of languages and customs, a testament to the empire's reach. You'd find traders from the Levant bargaining next to Gallic merchants, and slaves from Africa mingling with Greek philosophers. This diversity wasn't just tolerated, it was integral to Rome's vitality. The Romans were masters of cultural appropriation, taking the best bits from the peoples they conquered and making them their own. Their gods, architecture, and even their calendar owed much to the Etruscans, Greeks, and other cultures. The Forum was a living, breathing testament to this eclectic mix, a place where the empire's diversity was both celebrated and exploited. Yet, let's not romanticize this as some ancient utopia of multicultural harmony. The reality was more complex. While the Forum was a crucible of cultural exchange, it was also a stage for social tensions. Rome's expansion brought wealth, yes, but also inequality and unrest. The spectacle of the games served as both a distraction and a pressure valve for these societal stresses. Bread and circuses, after all, were the Roman answer to discontent. But why does this matter? Because the Forum wasn't just a relic of the past, it was a microcosm of human society, with all its triumphs and tribulations. It was a reminder that culture isn't static, it evolves, adapts, and sometimes clashes. The Roman Forum was where the empire's heart beat loudest, pumping the lifeblood of cultural exchange through its streets. So, when you watch a modern blockbuster with its CGI battles and dramatic flair, remember the Romans did it first, and often for real. Their games and ceremonies, though brutal by today's standards, were an integral part of their cultural tapestry. They were spectacles that unified and divided, entertained and enraptured, leaving a legacy as enduring as Rome itself. As we continue our exploration, keep these contradictions in mind. The Forum was where Rome came to live, celebrate, and sometimes face its starkest realities. So stay tuned. The story of this ancient urban stage is far from over, and there's so much more to uncover. As we saunter through the remnants of the Roman Forum, it's hard not to feel like we're stepping onto the set of history's longest-running drama. The Forum's ruins stand as silent witnesses to Rome's glory days, where every cracked column and scattered stone whispers tales of intrigue, power, and occasional folly. Fast forward a couple thousand years, and it's become a tourist hotspot, the ancient equivalent of that selfie-laden spot in Paris, where everyone pretends to hold up the Eiffel Tower. Yet, beyond the Instagram filters and guided tours, the Forum's legacy is a rich tapestry of myths and realities that continue to captivate historians and tourists alike. Let's talk about the myths first. For centuries, the Forum has been enveloped in a romantic mist, often hailed as the beating heart of the world's greatest empire, a place where marble gleamed and orators speechified their way into the annals of history. It's easy to get swept up in this grand narrative, imagining Julius Caesar striding across the Forum, toga fluttering in the breeze as he plotted his next political maneuver. But like all good stories, the truth is a bit more complex. Yes, the Forum was the epicenter of Roman life, but it was also a place where the grandeur often masked the grit. The marble was not always gleaming, and the speeches were as often about personal gain as they were about public good. The real Roman Forum was a chaotic mix of splendor and squalor, a place where you could rub shoulders with senators and slaves alike. Now, let's pivot to the realities unearthed by dusty archaeologists armed with trowels and a thirst for truth. Since the first spade hit the ground in the 19th century, the Forum has been a playground for archaeology's finest detectives. They've uncovered layers of history, like a well-baked lasagna, each strata revealing new insights into Roman life. For instance, the discovery of the lapis niger, a black marble shrine, shed light on Rome's early religious practices, hinting at rituals that predated the city's imperial grandeur. And then there's the Basilica Julia, built by none other than Julius Caesar himself, which served as a courthouse and a venue for public business. It was less about architectural beauty and more about practicality. Think of it as Rome's version of a government office, but with better acoustics. Archaeology has also laid bare the forum's economic underbelly, revealing the bustling markets where merchants hawked their wares and consumers haggled like their lives depended on it. The remains of various tavernae, or shops, paint a vivid picture of daily commerce, complete with the occasional scandal. It turns out that, even in ancient times, a dodgy merchant or two was always trying to pass off yesterday's fish as today's catch. But to truly grasp the forum's legacy, we must look beyond the stones and delve into its enduring influence on modern society. The echoes of ancient Roman social dynamics can still be heard in our own political and social arenas. Take the concept of the public forum itself, a space for debate, discussion, and decision-making. Today, our forums are digital, sprawling across social media platforms where ideas are exchanged with the swipe of a finger. Yet, the essence remains the same, a marketplace of ideas where voices compete for attention, influence, and authority. It's a reminder that while technology evolves, human nature stays remarkably consistent. Moreover, the Roman Forum's legacy is a testament to the power of urban planning, albeit planning that was more organic chaos than methodical blueprint. Rome's genius lay in its ability to adapt and innovate, transforming a swamp into a symbol of imperial might. The spirit of resilience is echoed in cities worldwide, where urban spaces continue to evolve in response to the needs of their inhabitants. And then there's the political theatre. The Roman Forum was the original stage for political drama, where power was performed as much as it was wielded. In today's world, the stage might be a televised debate or a viral tweet, but the theatricality of politics remains. The Romans understood that politics was as much about perception as policy, a lesson some of our modern leaders seem to have taken to heart, sometimes for better, often for worse. So, as we draw this historical exploration to a close, what can we take away from the Forum's legacy? Perhaps it's the realization that the past is never truly past. The Roman Forum, in all its crumbled glory, is a mirror reflecting the complexities of human society, its ambitions, its follies, and its enduring quest for meaning. The myths may captivate, but it's the realities that offer the most profound lessons. Rome wasn't built in a day, nor was it a utopia of marble and majesty. It was a living, breathing entity shaped by the same forces that continue to shape our world today. As you wander through the ruins, whether in person or in imagination, let the Forum's stones speak to you. Listen to the stories of ambition and adversity, of triumph and tragedy. And remember that while empires rise and fall, the human spirit endures, ever striving for greatness amidst the rubble of the past. And with that, our journey through the Roman Forum comes to an end, not with the silence of a forgotten ruin, but with the resounding echo of history's lessons, reminding us that the more things change, the more they stay the same. If there's one thing the Romans knew how to do, besides conquering half of the known world, it was eat in style. But hold on, before you start picturing them lounging around in togas, stuffing grapes into their mouths like a scene from a toga party gone wild, let's get real about what ancient Roman dining was truly like. The Roman culinary scene was as diverse as the empire itself, with a menu that stretched from the sands of Egypt to the icy waters of Britannia. Each region brought its own ingredients to the table, creating a mosaic of flavors that kept Roman taste buds on a constant journey. First, let's talk geography. The Roman Empire at its height was massive, spanning 3 continents. With that kind of reach, the Romans had access to an enviable variety of ingredients. The fertile lands of Egypt were the empire's breadbasket, supplying grain to the masses. Meanwhile, the olive groves of Hispania, that's Spain for us modern folks, and the vineyards of Gaul, now France, filled Roman amphorae with oils and wines that were the envy of the ancient world. And let's not forget the spices. Oh, those spices! Silk Road trade routes and maritime paths brought exotic spices from as far away as India and China, turning Roman kitchens into places of aromatic wonder. Now, while the Roman elite might have enjoyed these global flavors, let's get one thing straight. The average Roman citizen wasn't feasting on peacock tongues and flamingo brains every night. That's just the kind of culinary exaggeration that makes for entertaining myth, but falls apart faster than a poorly made garum sauce when you look at the facts. Most Romans were dining on a diet that would look a lot like the Mediterranean diet we laud today. Bread, olives, cheese, fruits, vegetables, and the occasional fish or piece of chicken if they were feeling fancy. Economic factors played a huge role in what ended up on Roman plates. The Roman economy wasn't just built on the backs of legionaries and farmers, it was driven by trade. The cost of transporting goods from one end of the empire to the other was significant. For example, it wasn't uncommon for spices to cost more than their weight in silver. Imagine that next time you're at the supermarket balking at the price of saffron. That's nothing compared to the lengths Romans went to for a bit of flavour. But let's not kid ourselves. While the empire facilitated trade, it wasn't all rainbows and spices. The economic disparities in Roman society were as glaring as a midday sun over the Forum. The wealthy could afford lavish banquets, complete with dishes that might make a modern foodie's heart race. Meanwhile, the common folk were more likely to find themselves eating a porridge-like concoction known as poles. It's a bit like oatmeal, but with more grunt work and less instant gratification. Speaking of banquets, the idea that every Roman meal was a gluttonous feast is, to put it mildly, a bit of historical fake news. Sure, the elite loved a good banquet, but the average Roman was more likely to eat a simple meal of bread and cheese washed down with some watered-down wine. That's right, they watered down their wine, probably to make it last longer and keep from getting too sloshed during a philosophical debate. The culinary culture of Rome was also a testament to the empire's adaptability. As the boundaries of the empire expanded, so did the Roman palate. The Romans were like the original foodies, always eager to try something new and incorporate it into their cuisine. They bring back new ingredients and recipes from their military campaigns, creating a fusion of flavors that was as diverse as the empire itself. In the bustling port city of Ostia, merchants would haggle over the price of spices and delicacies, while in Rome itself, the markets were a riot of colors and smells. Fish from the Mediterranean, wild game from the forests of Germania, and honey from the hives of Greece all vied for attention. It was a culinary bazaar that would make today's gourmet markets look like a roadside fruit stand. But let's not romanticize too much. The reality for most Romans was a life of simple sustenance rather than culinary indulgence. The grain dole, or anana, was a staple of Roman life, ensuring that citizens had access to basic provisions. It was the ancient version of social welfare, providing the common man with the bread that was the cornerstone of his diet. It's no exaggeration to say that bread was the staff of life in Rome. Without it, the empire might have crumbled under the weight of its own ambitions. So, while the tales of Roman feasts with dishes like stuffed dormice and garum-drenched everything make for juicy historical gossip, the average Roman's meal was decidedly more mundane. But within that simplicity lay a deep connection to the land and its produce, a culinary art form that was about making the most of what the empire had to offer. It was less about gluttonous excess and more about a celebration of the bounty that the Mediterranean world could provide. And there you have it, a bite-sized glimpse into the culinary world of ancient Rome, where trade routes brought exotic spices, economic realities shaped diets, and the average Roman citizen was more likely to be munching on barley than banqueting on boar. But don't worry, there's still plenty more to chew on as we continue our culinary journey through history. Stay tuned. Now, let's really dig into the social and political layers of Roman dining, because in the grand tapestry of ancient Rome, food wasn't just sustenance, it was a power move. Think of those legendary Roman banquets as the original Instagram influencer posts, all about status, clout, and a touch of showmanship. These gatherings were where Rome's elite flexed their wealth like a bodybuilder at a beach, with a side of peacock tongue for good measure. For the Roman upper crust, a banquet was more than just a meal, it was a theatrical production. It was a chance to parade their wealth, connections, and culinary prowess. And boy did they love to put on a show. Picture this: extravagant feasts featuring entertainment like acrobats, poets, and musicians, all while the host reclined in his best toga, sipping wine that was worth more than a small villa. It was all about who could outdo whom, in a game of gastronomic one-upmanship. The political significance of these banquets was as rich as the sauces served. Hosting a dinner wasn't just about feeding guests, it was about feeding their egos. It was a strategic move to curry favor, seal alliances, or perhaps even plot a little political subterfuge. You could say the Roman banquet was the ancient world's answer to a high-stakes poker game with courses of exotic dishes instead of playing cards. One prime example of this culinary diplomacy was Lucullus, a Roman general and statesman known for his legendary feasts. Lucullus didn't just serve food, he orchestrated experiences that were the talk of the empire. His banquets were so opulent that his name is still synonymous with luxury dining. Imagine hosting a dinner where the fish are imported from the Black Sea, the fruit from the distant orchards of Asia Minor, and the wine from the finest vineyards of Greece. It was a logistical feat that would make even today's event planners break into a sweat. But beneath this glamorous veneer lay a more complicated reality. Behind every lavish feast was an army of slaves and servants who toiled to make the magic happen. From the cooks laboring over hot fires to the servers ensuring each guest's goblet never ran dry, these banquets were a testament to the sweat and labor of those who remained invisible. It's like the Oscars, where everyone fawns over the actors but forgets the monumental effort of the crew behind the scenes. Speaking of logistics, let's talk numbers. A typical Roman banquet could easily feature dozens of dishes, each more extravagant than the last. Procuring these ingredients wasn't as simple as a trip to the local market. For instance, oysters were a favorite delicacy, but the best ones came from the coast of Britannia. Transporting them to Rome required a well-coordinated system of trade routes and preservation techniques. It was a delicate dance of supply and demand, and it didn't come cheap. In fact, some of these lavish spreads cost as much as an entire year's salary for a Roman soldier. That's right. One night of indulgence could equate to the hard-earned wages of a legionary who spent his days defending the empire's borders. Now, let's bust a myth, shall we? The image of Romans lounging around, constantly overindulging, is a bit inflated. Yes, the elite had their moments of bacchanalian excess, but it wasn't the norm. For many, these events were rare opportunities to indulge and impress. Most of the time, even the wealthy adhered to a more restrained lifestyle. The notion of constant debauchery makes for a good story, but remember, moderation had its place even in ancient Rome. The economics of these feasts also played a significant role in the social hierarchy. By hosting such events, the wealthy could reinforce their status and power. It was a visual reminder of who held the purse strings, and, by extension, the power. In a society where appearances mattered, the ability to throw an unforgettable banquet was akin to having a direct line to the emperor. It wasn't just about what was on the table, it was about who was sitting around it. Yet, all this grandeur wasn't just a display of personal wealth. It was political theatre. Imagine a senator wanting to secure votes for an upcoming election. What better way to win friends and influence people than by inviting them to a feast where the wine flows like the Tiber and the courses are more numerous than the emperor's titles? But let's not forget the guests themselves, who had their own roles to play. Attending such a banquet was a chance to see and be seen, to network and to engage in the art of conversation. It was, in many ways, the social media of the time, a place to forge connections, spread gossip, and perhaps even hatch a plot or two. After all, the Romans were nothing if not political animals, and what better venue for intrigue than a lavish dining room where the wine could loosen tongues and the food could inspire allegiances? So, the next time you hear tales of Roman feasts, remember, beneath the surface of opulence lay a carefully orchestrated dance of politics, power, and prestige. It was a world where food was more than sustenance. It was a statement, a weapon, and a symbol of the complex social web that defined Roman life. And while we might not be dining on flamingo tongues today, the echoes of those ancient banquets can still be felt in our own culinary rituals. Whether it's the power lunch, the networking dinner, or the holiday feast, the legacy of Roman dining lives on in the way we use food to connect, impress, and influence. But we're just warming up here, folks. There's more to uncover about the culinary world of ancient Rome, where food was a reflection of the empire's triumphs and tribulations. Stick around as we continue to unravel the delicious complexities of Roman culinary culture, where every meal tells a story and every bite holds a piece of history. So, as we dive deeper into the culinary cauldron of ancient Rome, buckle up, because it's time to separate the wheat from the chaff, literally and figuratively. When it came to cooking, the Romans weren't just throwing ingredients into pots and hoping for the best. Nope, they had a whole arsenal of techniques and tools that would make even today's kitchen gadget enthusiasts do a double take. First up, let's talk about garum, the Roman Empire's signature condiment. Picture this. A fermented fish sauce that was the ketchup and sriracha of its day, used to flavor everything from meats to desserts. Think of garum as the ancient Roman answer to MSG, a flavor bomb that could turn even the blandest barley porridge into something approaching palatable. But here's the kicker, making garum wasn't for the faint-hearted. The process involved layering fish guts and salt in large vats, then leaving them to ferment under the sun for several months. Imagine the aroma wafting through the neighborhood. Talk about a love into a hate situation. But for the Romans, it was worth the olfactory assault. Garum was liquid gold with a price tag to match. A high-quality jar of garum could cost as much as a bottle of imported wine. Beyond garum, the Romans had a surprisingly sophisticated array of kitchen tools. They didn't have blenders or food processors, but they made do with mortars and pestles, which were essential for grinding spices and herbs. And these weren't just any mortars and pestles. They were often crafted from marble or bronze, materials that could outlive their owners and still crush peppercorns like nobody's business. For baking, they had portable ovens that resembled large clay pots, which could be transported to an outdoor hearth. Talk about an early version of the pizza oven, minus the delivery app. In the realm of culinary techniques, the Romans had mastered the art of cooking with fire long before it became a camping cliché. They used braziers for grilling and frying, and their ovens, or furni, could bake bread with a crust so perfect it'd make any modern baker weep with envy. And let's not forget the testum, a type of clay dome used to roast meat. This technique, akin to today's Dutch oven, was all about slow cooking, allowing flavors to meld and meat to tenderize. The result? Roasted meats that could rival any modern barbecue. But here's the kicker. These methods were not just for the elite. Even the common Roman had access to basic cooking tools, making them the ancient equivalent of a home cook armed with a cast-iron skillet and a dream. Now, let's bust another myth wide open, the idea that Roman cooks were culinary geniuses. Sure, they had their moments of brilliance, but much of Roman cooking was about trial and error. Take Apicius, the famed Roman gourmand whose recipes have survived to this day. His cookbook reads like a cross between a culinary manual and a science experiment. Ingredients were often combined in unexpected ways. Think honey with fish sauce or fruit with vinegar. It was less about precise measurements and more about the art of improvisation. If you've ever thrown random ingredients into a pot and hoped for the best, congratulations, you're channeling your inner Roman chef. But let's not romanticize too much. While the elite enjoyed access to exotic ingredients and elaborate cooking techniques, the average Roman was engaging in a more utilitarian form of gastronomy. Cooking was often done in communal bakeries or shared kitchens, especially in crowded urban areas like Rome. For many, the kitchen was a corner of the house, with a small stove and a few basic utensils. It wasn't the sprawling, granite-countered kitchen of modern aspirations, but it got the job done. Economically speaking, the Roman approach to food was a reflection of the empire's broader priorities. The cost of food was a major concern, especially in a city like Rome, where feeding the population was a logistical challenge. The grain dole ensured that citizens had access to affordable bread, but other ingredients could be prohibitively expensive. Spices, as mentioned earlier, were a luxury item, often more costly than their weight in silver. The average Roman family had to be strategic about their food budget, much like today's savvy shoppers clipping coupons and hunting for sales. And here's an interesting tidbit. Romans were masters at food preservation, a necessary skill given the lack of refrigeration. They salted meats, pickled vegetables, and even stored fruits and honey. These methods weren't just about extending shelf life, they were about survival in an era where food scarcity was a constant threat. It's a bit like your grandmother's canning obsession, but with more urgency and a touch of desperation. So, while Roman cuisine might not have been the gastronomic utopia we sometimes imagine, it was a testament to human ingenuity and adaptability. It was about making the most of what was available, whether that meant fermenting fish guts into a prized sauce or baking bread in a communal oven. The Romans didn't just conquer lands, they conquered the culinary challenges of their time with a mix of innovation, resourcefulness, and, yes, a bit of luck. But let's keep the momentum going, because there's more to explore in this culinary adventure. As we unravel the layers of Roman cooking, we'll uncover how these techniques and technologies laid the groundwork for future culinary traditions. So stay tuned, because the feast is far from over, and there are plenty more flavors to savor in the fascinating world of ancient Rome. So, let's dive headfirst into the melting pot that was Roman cuisine. Forget any notion of Romans as culinary purists. They were more like creative culinary magpies, snatching shiny ideas from the Greeks, Egyptians, and Persians to feather their own nests, starting with the Greeks. The Greeks. If the Romans were the apprentices, the Greeks were the seasoned chefs. The Romans didn't just admire Greek cuisine, they gobbled it up, both literally and figuratively. Greek cooks were the rock stars of Roman kitchens, and their influence was as pervasive as a catchy pop song. The Romans adopted Greek methods of food preparation and presentation, elevating simple ingredients into sophisticated dishes. They even embraced the Greek symposium, transforming their own banquets into intellectual and gastronomic marathons. But let's debunk a popular myth that Romans invented the concept of refined dining. The truth is, they were standing on the shoulders of Greek culinary giants. The Greeks had been perfecting the art of dining for centuries, with a focus on balance and harmony that would make any modern nutritionist weep with envy. They understood that food was as much about the spirit as it was about the stomach. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, took these Greek ideals and made them their own, giving birth to a hybrid culinary culture that was as Roman as it was Greek. Now, let's sail down the Nile to Egypt, where the Romans found more than just fertile land for grain. Egyptian cuisine offered unique flavors that the Romans busily absorbed into their own. The Egyptians had a thing for beer and bread, staples that resonated with the Romans' own dietary preferences. But it was the exotic ingredients like cumin, coriander, and aniseed that really caught the Roman imagination. These spices added a new dimension to Roman cooking, giving dishes a flavor profile that was decidedly un-Roman and deliciously different. And then there's the Persian influence. While Rome and Persia often found themselves at odds politically, the culinary exchange between the two was more peaceful. The Persians were the masters of spice and luxury. Their love for saffron, cinnamon, and cloves was infectious. Romans, ever the connoisseurs of fine things, couldn't resist the allure of these spices. Persian culinary techniques, such as stewing meat with fruit, added a touch of Eastern opulence to Roman tables. This wasn't just about flavor, it was about prestige. Serving a dish with Persian roots was a subtle way of saying, "Look at me, I'm worldly and sophisticated." Yet, here's where we drop the spoon on another myth, the idea that these influences were some kind of cultural theft. The term culinary appropriation doesn't quite fit the ancient context. In those days, borrowing elements from other cultures was seen as a sign of strength and adaptability. It was less about theft and more about creating a culinary mosaic that reflected the vast tapestry of the Roman Empire. But let's not oversimplify. This culinary exchange wasn't always smooth sailing. There were moments of cultural friction, where traditional Roman tastes clashed with these foreign flavors. Not every Roman was eager to swap their beloved Poles for a spice-laden dish. This culinary conservatism wasn't just about taste, it was about identity. The Romans were proud of their heritage, and while they were open to new experiences, they weren't about to abandon their own traditions wholesale. Economically, these cultural influences were a double-edged sword. On one hand, they enriched the Roman palate and introduced new ingredients that became prized commodities. On the other hand, they created a demand for luxury items that could strain even the wealthiest patrician's purse. The cost of importing Persian spices or hiring a Greek chef was steep, and not every Roman household could afford such indulgences. This created a culinary divide, where the wealthy flaunted their cosmopolitan tastes, while the average Roman soldiered on with more humble fare. And speaking of soldiers, let's not forget the role they played in this culinary exchange. As the Roman legions marched across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, they didn't just bring back tales of conquest, they brought back recipes. These soldiers were like culinary ambassadors, introducing new flavors to Rome and spreading Roman tastes to the far corners of the empire. It was a two-way street of gastronomic influence, and the legions were the delivery drivers. Now, you might be wondering why any of this matters. Well, here's the thing. The Roman approach to cuisine was a reflection of their broader worldview. They weren't just expanding their culinary horizons, they were expanding their cultural ones. In embracing the foods of other cultures, the Romans were acknowledging the richness and diversity of the world they sought to rule. It was a culinary testament to the idea that strength lies in diversity. But let's not get too sentimental. For all their culinary inclusivity, the Romans could be brutally pragmatic. They embraced foreign cuisines not out of some altruistic desire for multiculturalism, but because it suited their needs. They were empire builders, and in the cutthroat world of ancient geopolitics, you used whatever tools were at your disposal, including a well-stocked spice rack. So, as we stir the pot of Roman culinary history, remember that the story of their cuisine is a tale of adaptation, innovation, and, yes, a bit of appropriation. It's a reminder that food has always been a bridge between cultures, a way to connect, conquer, and create. And as we move forward in our exploration of Roman dining, keep in mind that there's always more to the story than meets the eye or the palate. With our appetites whetted, there's still a smorgasbord of history to dig into. Next, we'll uncover how the Romans took these influences and ran with them, creating a culinary legacy that would outlast the empire itself. Stay tuned, because the journey through the flavors of the ancient world is far from over, and there are still plenty of delicious secrets to uncover. So as we ladle out the final serving of our Roman culinary saga, let's dig into how these ancient practices have simmered into modern cuisine. You might not realize it as you fork into that spaghetti carbonara, but Roman culinary DNA is entwined with our own kitchen escapades. And before you ask, no, Julius Caesar didn't invent Caesar salad though. Given his knack for branding, he probably would have approved. First, let's talk pasta. While the Romans weren't twirling linguine with quite the finesse of a modern trattoria, they did have their own primitive version. Enter laganum, a flat sheet of dough akin to what we'd call lasagna today. Back then, it wasn't layered with ricotta and marinara, but was more of a filler for stews. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and you can see how these humble beginnings led to Italy's pasta explosion. Take that, Marco Polo. Your noodle legend is more a myth than fact, with Roman roots already in place centuries before. Then there's the matter of bread. Romans didn't just break bread, they perfected it. Bakers' guilds in ancient Rome were as exclusive as today's Michelin-starred kitchens. They introduced techniques that would lay the groundwork for European baking traditions. The Roman panis quadratus, a round, scored loaf, is practically a blueprint for modern sourdough. They even had communal ovens, which, if you squint a little, resemble today's trendy bakeries with their wood-fired charm. Now, let's swerve into a taste of Roman wine culture. While Romans watered down their wine, perhaps to avoid turning philosophical debates into drunken brawls, they were serious about their viniculture. From the rolling hills of Gaul to the sun-drenched slopes of Hispania, Roman viticulture set the stage for the wine regions that are now household names. The next time you're uncorking a Bordeaux, give a nod to Roman viticulturists who tilled those very vineyards 2,000 years ago, and we can't ignore the Romans' botanical contributions. The empire spread seeds of agricultural knowledge across vast lands. From the orchards of Asia Minor came cherries and apricots, while Egypt's fertile fields introduced the art of cultivating vegetables like cucumbers and lettuce. The Romans turned gardening into an empire-wide enterprise, and today's farmers' markets owe them a debt of gratitude for the bounty of produce we now enjoy. But here's where we burst another bubble. That idyllic picture of Romans tucking into a colourful cornucopia? Well, let's just say their reality was less farm-to-table and more survivalist. The bulk of the Roman diet was a monotonous affair. Grains, grains, and more grains. The annona, Rome's grain dole, was less whole foods and more food security, ensuring the masses didn't revolt due to hunger. The rich might have feasted on oysters and wild boar, but the average Roman supper was as exciting as an ancient cooking show with one ingredient. Speaking of survival, let's not forget the Roman knack for preservation, essential in an era without refrigeration. They salted, smoked, and pickled with the precision of an artisanal deli. These techniques were not just about extending shelf life, they were culinary life hacks that have persisted through the ages. Next time you enjoy a jar of olives or a piece of prosciutto, remember that you're indulging in a practice perfected under the Roman sun. Now, onto the myths versus the cold hard facts. The image of Romans as gluttons indulging in bacchanalian orgies of excess. It's a delicious fiction, seductive in its decadence yet far from the norm. The truth is, most Romans were as pragmatic about their meals as they were about their politics. For every Lucullus hosting a feast that could bankrupt a small nation, there were 1,000 Romans making do with a bowl of pulse. And while the idea of reclining at a feast is charming, in reality it was a privilege reserved for the few, not the many. So why does any of this matter? Because the Romans were masters of culinary adaptation, taking what they learned from conquered lands and making it their own, a practice that resonates in today's global food culture. They showed us that innovation often springs from necessity, and that the fusion of flavors isn't a modern phenomenon, but a timeless tradition. In a world where food is often seen as a reflection of identity, the Romans remind us that culinary exchange is not just about borrowing recipes, it's about building bridges. And as we wrap up this journey through Roman gastronomy, let's chew over this. The legacy of Roman cuisine is a testament to resilience, adaptation, and the eternal human quest for something tasty on the table. From the rustic simplicity of poles to the lavish spectacle of a banquet, Roman culinary practices laid the groundwork for European gastronomy, influencing everything from the bread we bake to the wine we sip. So next time you gather around a table laden with food, whether it's a humble sandwich or a gourmet feast, take a moment to appreciate the ancient lineage of flavors and traditions that have journeyed through time to reach your plate. The Romans might not be sitting beside you, but their influence surely is, reminding us that while empires may fall, the hunger for good food endures. That's the true legacy of Roman dining. A gastronomic thread that weaves through history, tying us to the past and each other, one delicious bite at a time.